charge the towns.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Town of Camden Select Board meeting for October 8th, 2019. As always, a reminder on the agenda, for those of you here, these meetings are being live streamed and recorded. With that said, I'll go right to our agenda and ask for any public input on non-agenda items. Anybody here would like to speak to something non-agenda? Not seeing any hands. Oh, I can hear myself. Terrible voice. So not seeing that, we'll go directly to select board reports. Do you want to start, Taylor?
Nothing for me tonight.
All right, Allison. Oh, Mark, dare I ask, with the posters in his hand?
I want to talk about the Opera House.
Go for it.
We have one of the premier venues in Maine, and it just keeps getting better, and the shows have been spectacular. We recently had a sellout for Roger McGuinn over Windjammer Weekend. We just had a sellout for Bob Marley has another comedy show that ended up sold out. All its tickets out today. It's his fourth show in the area in the last couple months, and that's sold out for next week, I guess. We just had one night in Memphis, which was a musical performance that duplicated the four performances of, what was it, Elvis Presley,
Jerry Lee Lewis?
Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, and who am I missing? And who is it? Johnny Cash. And that sold over 400 tickets.
Almost full.
With great success. We just started, they just had the first annual Glenn Jenks Ragtime Review, and that sold over 300 tickets, and it just came on the agenda pretty recently, and was great response, and it's looking like that will be an annual presentation now, which is terrific. Our Blue Cafe, if you have not been on the third floor, we've taken one of the rooms on the third floor of the Opera House and turned in a little performance place, and it's once a month on a Friday night, and it's free, totally free. There's a cash bar set up by 40 Paper, but the performances are free. We just had another really, really crowded performance a couple weeks ago, which was great. And then the next one is an amazing acoustic guitarist. I am not going to try and pronounce his name. It's Hiroa Tsukamoto. Thank you. Reviews on his performances are amazing. Again, it's free. We have an overflow room with speakers, so if the little room where the performances are too crowded, you can sit in the overflow room. One of the great experiences coming up. There's also some other shows coming up. There's the next Maine Made Music show is coming in November 16th is David Mallet with Caroline Cotter, which we're looking for. David Mallet, of course, is a big Maine name, been around the father of the Mallet Brothers Band. And then the last thing I want to mention is the community thank you film. We do some free movies every year. The community thank you film on Veterans Day on Monday, November 11th is They Shall Not Grow Old, which is the film about World War I that Peter Jackson, who did Lord of the Rings and everything, put together from old films from England from World War I and colorized them, modernized them. I've seen the film. It's an amazing film, and I can't think of anything better to show on Veterans Day to remember all the people that have done so much for this country. So great things happening at the Opera House. Go to the website and check it out, see what, there's so many great shows, and we're getting real good response. I mean, that's what I've got.
Mark, thank you. I always want to stand up and cheer after you talk.
Can I ask a question about the
Of
Opera
course you
House?
can.
The Blue Cafe is once
a month on Friday nights, yeah.
Are there other things that happen there on other, how much is that third floor being used otherwise?
There are other events, but they're not, people rent it for different functions and stuff like that. It was used for SIF, for instance. But that's the one public event they've tried to make as a regular event.
Right. Do you have any sense of how often that's available, or could there be more that,
There could be more. I mean, it's
maybe encouraging people, like, get in touch with Dave if you want to do an event up there. It's available more than,
yeah.
or are we kind of at saturation point where we're like, no, don't you know,
I
where,
think it's always interesting for anybody to reach out, it's a town building, and, we're here to support townspeople. So if there's something we'd like to have, certainly, reach out and, see what's available.
Probably more available than not.
that's my guess.
Yeah, I think so. I talked to Dave a little bit about the energy thing in the building when we walked up. He says, we're not using it that much yet. And that's all he said, no,
Yeah.
not that much. I don't know what that much is, but I think it's probably more available than not.
'Cause it is really nice up there.
It is, it really is.
Oh, it's
And
great, yeah.
Blue Cafe has been a good bellwether for what can be done up there.
Yeah, and they put in, better lighting, better sound system over time as they develop it. So it just keeps improving the performance area.
Great, thanks, Mark.
Welcome.
Audra?
Yes, so I have a few updates. In regards to the development of the website, we're at a stage now where we need to finalize the site map. So I've been working on that. I've sent it out to a few people also to take a look, but I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sort of take a stab at drafting based on the template that I was given by Revise, the site map, and then sending it out for comment again. And talking to a few people about what they'd like to see. It's a really important step in the process because it helps us to organize our content and figure out how we want it presented and what we want to give prominence to and just the way that we want to prioritize information on the website. So it's a really important step in the process. And once we finalize the site map, we're going to begin the migration of data over from the old site to the new.
Do you want us to save our questions until the end, or?
No, you can ask
Topic by
now.
topic.
This makes it easier. You can ask now.
Okay. So when do you think we should get public input, and how should we do that? And should we, I'm not even sure the rest of the select board has seen, we saw some of the mock-ups that everybody was like, oh, we don't like that, and then a smaller group of us worked on the basic design template and agreed on that, but I don't know if we brought that back, and I think we
Yeah, we
should
haven't
probably
yet.
talk about it a little bit more and show a little bit of what we have, so that it's a challenging thing to get public input on, because everybody has, we've gotten a little bit, but I think we should do it somehow.
Yeah, we
should-
definitely
I mean,
need
I hate to say
to
a
do
workshop,
that.
but,
I'm just trying to figure out what's the best stage, because
Yeah.
with a site map, it's really just like an Excel file kind of showing like,
That's
this is
all
the
the
parent,
categories.
these are the children, these are the grandchildren, whatever you want to call them. So
That actually matters.
it matters a lot, but it can be hard for people to look at it and pick out, how it's
But
going to
even
work.
just what should if you go to the homepage, what should the big headers be? What should, we've had this idea of,
Pull down
for
menus.
residents, for visitors, for,
Mm-hmm.
what are the other categories? And we didn't like that.
Yeah.
But, how do you break it down for people, and what's,
So maybe this is the time.
Well, do we have whenever we have a good model to show so we can visually see something, because I know for me, if I don't see something visual, it ain't gonna work. I don't have a vision of a website like
I
you
mean,
may or you may.
we have sort of the mock-up of the design, and then we have the Excel file that has the
The
site
program.
map. So maybe together, that'll be enough to give everybody an idea.
Okay. Well, think about it. We could do a workshop, actually. We could open it up to a public that way, maybe the best way to do it otherwise. But then on the other hand, too many cooks can really spoil the stew too, so.
Yeah.
we could do it so that, you don't have to listen to
Right,
everyone, but there are even just some of the things that, I think Nina Holland had sent us something that was really, actually quite helpful, and not every single thing can go in there, but.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm kind of struggling now
feature?
in trying to put it all together is like, do we give a sort of area of the website where you can look at special reports and studies or major projects, its own section, and how do we organize that? It's that kind of level of detail that I could really use some input
Okay.
in right now.
All right. I don't think,
I just really don't want all of our links to be broken.
No.
yeah.
But, yeah.
Let's think about a future event and when you call the timing of it, because like I said, it should be enough substance that people sink their teeth into, and not enough, too much concept, I would think it'd be dangerous.
Yes.
Even just what do you like and what don't you like about the current website?
We could reach out for that now.
And provide
We
a
could reach out
way
for that now.
Yeah.
to,
Okay.
So my next update, the LED streetlight conversion project. So we're, this week, I'm going to get the paperwork from Central Maine Power to actually move forward with the acquisition of the lights. That's really important because, you know, if you look at the critical path for the project and getting us to a point where we can install the new lights, we, of course, have to own them before we get there. So
Yep.
I should get that paperwork. I was told by the middle of the week, I'll be able to sign everything because we know exactly the cost. It's going to be $32,000 to acquire them, which is almost exactly what was estimated when we got the project proposal and the conceptual budget. Also on the critical path right now is choosing an installer, and it's very likely that the installer will be the company that we have a long-term maintenance contract with. And so the way that was done is because we went in, you know, with 6 other towns, Realterm put out an RFP and they got 3 responses for installers. So they've asked me to coordinate with the 5 other towns, choosing an installer and, you know, who we want to have a long-term maintenance agreement. They're all Maine companies. One is a Camden company, which is really fortunate. So I think that that's going to be, you know, really good. And I think, you know, everybody was in a range of 5 to 10% within the same price
good.
difference.
That's
So
good.
that's great. We're going to meet on the 15th, all the town managers and administrators, to just make sure we're all on the same page with the installer. And we'll be able to begin the industrial grade audit very shortly after that. And that's kind of the point of no return where we're moving the project forward. They're thinking that we're kind of a little bit further ahead than the other towns. So I think that, you know, they're hoping November, December for the actual installation of the new LED streetlights. So that project is moving along. So the Montgomery Dam, as everybody knows, we were awarded a grant by the Maine Coastal Program for $40,000, as well as the Island Institute's Shore Up Program for $10,000 to look at engineering and design for the Montgomery Dam. So at this stage, we're kind of meeting, we've met with a landscape architect. We might meet with another one to just try to get a sense of, you know, their understanding of the project and how we move that forward, because I think that discipline is going to be most important to the project in being able to visualize what the area can look like and how it can function. So that's what we're hoping to do is, you know, get somebody who really understands what it is we need out of this project to move it forward and can really work with us to help come up with a.
To provide better visuals.
Yes, yeah. And then, you know, get the landscape architect to work with them to come up with the concept. And then we have, you know, the engineering team that we worked with on the feasibility study to, you know, provide the actual engineering to make it a reality. So as soon as we do that, we'll have a project kickoff meeting with all of the consultants that we're going to work with. Also, this is probably part of your update, Bob, but we need to look at scheduling a few workshops and meetings.
Yes.
One for ordinance prioritization, because we're kind of at a point now where we need some direction from all of you, because I know this sounds ridiculous, but town meeting in June comes quicker than you think.
Does.
So it'd be really helpful to kind of get to a point where we are, figuring out what we want to work on. I was approached by the Ragged Mountain Foundation about having a meeting with the select board because they're interested in kicking off fundraising for the lodge. So they would like to just talk with the select board and make sure that everybody's on the same page. They want to talk a little bit about where they came from with this project and some of the history around, you know, the design of the lodge that they were looking at fundraising towards, because they want to make sure that, everybody's on the same page if they're going to
Sure.
begin their
Yeah, I'll
campaign.
discuss those and schedule those next.
And the other thing, there's a letter in your packet from the Lincolnville Select Board, and they're just explaining how they would like to meet with the Camden Select Board, and they're pretty flexible on how we did it. They said they would come to one of our meetings, or you could go to one of their meetings to talk about the Montgomery Dam Advisory Committee and the policy around how that all works. They want to relook at that, so I think it just depends on what's going to work best for the board.
Okay.
And my last thing, a few of us from Camden attended a meeting that the county held on regional planning and economic development services. So just today, the Midcoast Regional Planning Commission was dissolved because they've come to a point where they haven't had an executive director in 9 months. They're not really receiving enough funding to be sustainable, and just their whole, model of bringing in revenue wasn't really working. They weren't a financially viable organization anymore. So the county wanted to have a better sense of how are some of the smaller towns that really aren't large enough to have a professional like Jeremy going to receive some of the planning and development services that a lot of us larger towns have staff members that can provide. And, they've kind of, we're talking about a couple of different options, one of them being looking at what Lincoln County does, where they have sort of a county department that does planning and development work, and also looking at the Midcoast Economic Development District and how they might be able to take over some of the work that the Regional Planning Commission used to do. And from the group that was there, because all of the service center communities within Knox County are members of the Midcoast Economic Development District, because
This is, and I feel like you might be jumping to, this was complicated.
it's pretty complicated.
It's very complicated.
Yeah.
They all know what,
Yes.
I don't, if you guys already know, do you know what like the Midcoast Regional, because I did not, and I was in that meeting like whispering about it, like, does
What's
everybody
going
else
on?
understand this?
Yeah, and I apologize. This is something that I did for a long time, so it's like I almost know.
It's like me and Midcoast
to-
Solid Waste.
Yeah, like to a
Yeah.
point where I can be unhelpful and obtuse, so.
What's the next action?
What was the major, because the thing is, that it seems like they took a lot of, they were a vehicle for some state and federal money, that some of it has to pass through one of these regional, what's it called again? Regional
Planning
planning
commissions.
commissions.
Yeah. Yes. So, the way that it did work was that they had contracts with the state government, the Maine Department of Transportation, and the former state planning office. And through those contracts, they could provide planning services to municipalities.
Like when somebody needed to update a shoreline zoning map or something,
Yeah, or their comp
Comp
plan,
plan.
or
or their, yeah.
wanted to write a new ordinance.
I did see the video of that meeting. It was interesting.
There wasn't, you mean,
Well, what you gave.
oh, did you listen to it?
Not all of it. Not all of it, no.
I made an I did make an audio recording if anybody
Yes,
is
it
interested.
was interesting. I just felt, I wasn't sure there was anything came out that had a direction to it. That's what we'd like to hear in the future from you, is what you recommend as the direction.
So what I'm strongly recommending is in the best interest of the town of Camden. So as a service center community and a community that wants to avail itself of federal funding, for example, I see on our horizon that we're going to want to apply for a fairly significant grant to the Economic Development Administration, because we've got some, significant upgrades we'd like to make on the harbor, public landing, other infrastructure there. We're going to want to avail ourselves of those funds, as well as Northern Border Regional Commission money. And the only way that we can be eligible to receive those funds is if we're a member of an economic development district, of which McEd is the one for our region. So that's why we're a dues-paying member. That's why I'm on the board of directors, and we have been participating for quite a while.
Right.
So by virtue of that fact, we're a member of McEd. If you're the community, if you're Hope, for example, you're not, you don't see the need to do that. However, in addition to the economic development benefits, McEd can also provide regional planning services such as ordinance development. They can write comp plans, all of those services that the Planning Commission used to provide. So, instead of each of the service center communities separately paying dues to McEd, I think it's in everybody's best interest if the county pays dues to McEd, and then by virtue of the fact the county's paying, we're all members.
Action, what should we do to encourage that?
So it would be really helpful if we could advocate to our budget committee member
Okay.
that they support the budget line that the county's putting forward for regional planning and economic development.
So you should be drafting a letter in that regard then.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. It would be great, a letter from the select board. I'll write a letter as well.
And not just to Randy, but to probably the whole
Yeah.
group, the commissioners
committee.
and the, budget committee.
Yeah.
Or you can go to the meeting, which is conveniently on Halloween.
Yes.
There you go. So two letters, one from the select board and one from the town manager.
Yes,
Okay.
and it's difficult because a lot of the budget committee members, they're not the customers of a organization like McEd. They're not going, a lot of them aren't going to be in a position where they need to apply for funding to the EDA, or they necessarily need regional planning services. So,
Got it.
yeah,
Thank you, Audra. Anything else?
that's it.
Did you want to mention about EPA and Tannery, that they're going to be moving forward on that?
How
I
about
can
you do
mention
that?
it. I'll mention it really quick. I just communicated with Alan Peterson from EPA today, and the targeted assessment funds for the Tannery Riverbank, that has gone through contracting and EPA, so they're finalizing the quality assurance action plan for that right now, and they'll be hiring a contractor likely this week. And then, so I would suspect within the next month, we'll be up there sampling on the riverbank and elsewhere on the site.
Great.
Before the ground
Get it done
freezes.
before the ground, I was going to say that, before the ground
Before it
freezes,
freezes.
before we get some weather.
Yeah, we'll be there before it freezes.
So exciting.
Yes, thank you very much.
It
Good
is.
information. With your segue into
I can barely contain myself.
my couple of reports, well, first one, on Monday a week ago, I did attend part of the Charter Commission's meeting for an hour or so. Actually, it was a pretty good meeting. I was impressed by they were just starting to get into the guts of looking at the charter kind of piece by piece. I mentioned it mainly because they did request at the meeting that if anybody, the town manager or anybody in the select board has any comments or areas they think should be looked at by the commission, to please document that, just so you know there is a Charter Commission comments document on the OneDrive, and I have put a couple of comments in there. I believe Audra's put one in there. So if you were interested and have anything, please update that document. So we should get that to them by their October 28th meeting, I think it is, whatever that day was, at their request. Then to the issue of the workshops, there are really, we could package them into two. The Snowball and the Lodge discussions that Audra had, they had suggested a workshop on October 29th, which is a Wednesday, I believe, and at 11 a.m. as a time they threw out. So, well, look, I'm not sure all, I'm not sure all your schedules, but that was one that was proposed. And while you're looking at calendars,
Okay, we're going to do this, we're going to schedule now.
Okay,
we
what was
don't
that
have
date?
to. I just want to throw them out there, sorry.
What was that date you
October
mentioned?
29, which is a Wednesday, at 11 a.m.
29 is a Tuesday.
It is?
I
Yes,
count.
it is a Tuesday. I'm sorry, it is a Tuesday. My bad, because Thursday's Halloween. I never forget that. The 29th,
Halloween is always in a,
no, I never forget Halloween. My
you
favorite
were saying you
holidays.
never forget that it's on a Thursday or something.
Thank you, Allison. No, back to reality. Just kidding.
That was harsh.
No, it wasn't. It was,
Okay, I can take, I'm
You're,
tough.
I know you are. Tuesday, October 29th at 11 a.m. was one proposed, their proposed date. If we can't do it, we can't do it, but that was a proposed date. There was, well, while you're thinking about that, there was a second workshop we've talked about, one, combining two topics in one workshop, one which would be ordinance development, which would be the primary focus. But I'm thinking now with coming workload in next week's, 2 weeks, agenda for the select board's getting heavy. And we have a couple of executive sessions that we need to attack, and I was thinking of possibly doing those two in the same time on the
And
21st.
meet with the Lincolnville Select Board and the website.
What date is that?
Or-
Oh, no, I didn't bring that one. I'm not bringing that one up yet.
So what are we looking to combine, executive session and Ragged Mountain?
Ordinance,
Oh, ordinance.
What date is that?
21.
Monday, the 21st? What time?
Ordinance.
Why
Are there a
ordinance?
bunch of ordinances?
Well, what we need to do, and it shouldn't, I'm hoping it won't take that long, is there has been a number of ordinances have been discussed for revision, and we can
Oh, like the
only.
noise ordinance.
Yeah, and you see, woke her up. We just need to prioritize what we can get done. We think we can get done because we can't get them all done. And we've been there before. We're not going to make the same mistake again. We're going to try to prioritize, and Jerry may help us understand which ones might be easier and which ones might be more difficult to accomplish. That will be the primary focus of that workshop. Secondary would be executive sessions too.
We can't have executive session workshops, but, so that.
No, it's not. It's an executive session period.
One thing I would like to add, something we talked about, and it has not come up with the rest of the board, is usually after every election, the select board has a workshop where we discuss
Goals.
priorities,
Goals and
goals.
priorities.
And we have not had that since the election,
that's
and I
great.
think that's important.
That's correct. And I think,
I always liked that.
sorry, go ahead.
I always liked those.
I know you do. You like them all. And I agree,
Thank you,
we could
Mike.
also schedule that, but that's probably going to fall into November.
Yeah, that's fine. I just
Okay.
wanted to make
But
sure
no,
that
I
we get.
totally
That would
agree.
be before, I mean, goals and ordinances kind of, not all ordinances are goals, but.
No, that's true.
some-
That's
some goals are ordinances.
Yeah, I think the ordinance thing has slipped off far enough, and we are getting tight,
If we
I
could do,
believe.
It is tight.
if we're going to do,
Anything that goes on the June ballot, which isn't necessarily, I mean,
absolutely.
it should be like a June ballot workshop.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's excellent point.
mean-
so if you're talking about the
Excellent point.
21st, 11 o'clock would be a preferable time for me, or later in the day.
Taylor?
It's good for me.
All right. Allison? There you go. And then, well, just table for the moment, the priorities one for the select board, because I think it's very important. We'll probably schedule that at the next select board meeting.
That's fine. Just
But I
wanted to
think
make
it's-
sure that we didn't
No, it's a
forget.
very good point. We haven't done it because it hasn't been a lot of change, as you
Right.
pointed out, and that's not excuse. Okay.
21st at 11?
Yes. So October 21st at 11 a.m. would be the meeting for the ordinance and 2 executive sessions.
Well,
And
I mean,
the 29th would be for the discussion on the Snow Bowl and the lodge, Ragged Mountain Foundation. All right.
hold on, 2 executive sessions
Yes.
and ordinances. I guess I wish I knew
Well-
what the executive sessions were, so I'd know how much stamina is, or time is, how much.
Well,
total time
we had talked about doing these executive sessions at the next select board meeting, but we can still do that. But that is just stacking up, I think, a little bit much, and I think after 3 or 4 hours, my head starts turning to mush, and then we got to try to manage
That's what
time.
I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's-
Now, if, we'll just schedule it that way for now, but if we think the 2 executive sessions plus order, any of these is getting too long, we'll break them out.
I mean, frankly, I think we can handle the ordinance for June in a half hour.
Okay. I was just going to say
Anything
keep
we
it
want
to
on
an
the
hour,
ballot.
but yeah.
Yes, yes, it should be, I agree with Alice,
June ballot
anything,
workshop.
June ballot.
Ballot workshop is good.
June ballot workshop, which includes ordinances.
Half
of
hour,
course.
max on that.
Then I don't, you never know how long executive session is going to go, but I can guarantee you it's going to be an hour.
Yeah, that's should be fine.
You said you never know.
Well, I'm guessing.
Guarantee.
I think if you start out with your mind as mush already, then it works much smoother. I found that.
But you just give it, that's what I find I get tired, I start giving into
He's
everything.
so honest. But anyhow, that's what we'll schedule for now, and then I'll write down an action for the priorities for the
Next
select
meeting, we
board.
can talk about
Got it?
that.
All right.
Okay, what time are, for the 29th?
The 29th was 11 also, and the 21st was 11 a.m. All right. That's it for.
When are we going to do Lincolnville and website?
They're not scheduled yet.
TBD.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know exactly what to do
Website we
yet
should
with
get
the.
moving with.
Yeah, I agree.
So Lincolnville, it might be easiest if, you just choose whether or not you want to invite them to one of our meetings, or if a couple of you want to go to one of
Yeah,
theirs.
I
their letter suggests
think they
that
really want it to be everyone.
Yeah. they
Well,
would
the letter
prefer
suggests
that.
maybe starting smaller and maybe sending somebody from here to one of their meetings to discuss it. In the letter that's in our packet.
I thought the letter said that that's how it would work afterwards, but that they wanted,
Yeah, I think they'd
they
prefer.
want to start, because, I mean, it really is a policy level decision, because we have these, it does make sense for it to be everyone in a lot of ways, depending, well,
Oh, you can open it up to all, or you can open it up to a small, what is the objective of this work session? What are they trying to come up with, just a long discussion or some action plan?
So they're concerned with the current policy that we're operating from
Right.
that sort of
the Montgomery
loosely.
Watershed Association gave us these two dams
I know.
because they didn't want to pay for them anymore, quite frankly. And it was just easiest to give them to the town of Camden. And so they, along with that, there was $20,000 that was in this reserve sort of trust fund. And then, because it's known that it's a benefit to both Camden and Lincolnville, at the time, they said, okay, we'll have this dam advisory committee, and that's how we'll advise on the decisions about how to, money that's needed for the dams. At that point, it was a lot less money most of the time, because they were still sort of holding out.
Sure.
But, and so the way it works is the dam advisory committee advises the Camden Select Board on what we put in the budget. But then Lincolnville, it's sort of been this handshake deal all this time, that Lincolnville is going to pay a third of whatever the costs are. In reality, I mean, they've just been abiding by this, but as things get, the price tags are bigger and bigger, it is a little bit tough for them, because they don't have any actual control. It's sort of, there's also nothing that actually forces them to pay a third of the bill. And all, the actual decisions get made by the Camden voters. So we do need to kind of,
Are they represented on the dam committee? Do they have representation there?
yes, but the dam committee is only advisory in nature. So they do have representatives on the dam committee, but they accurately point out that the dam committee has no actual power.
And I mean, I think it's similar to our situation where
Yeah.
it's gotten a little bit disconnected
Yep.
over the years from, the select boards and.
Sure.
Right, it's just sort of been too long since the two towns have talked about it,
So,
I think,
so you're
so.
proposing a dual select board meeting?
They
Yeah.
said they would come to one of our meetings, I think,
Yep,
so.
they'll come to one of ours, or they've invited us to go to one of
Why don't you
theirs.
like them to November 6th?
Yep.
And we could have get somebody maybe just to do a presentation on the overview of the history of it,
We
and,
should, absolutely. Because it's just a discussion, we're not making a decision here. But, and then if that leads to a joint select board meeting that's fine too. Well, let's have a preliminary discussion on the 6th here. All right? So that's a Wednesday in November, which I was surprised to see, that it's the day after the election is our select board meeting on the calendar.
Day of?
Just making a
did we
point.
make that?
I guess we did, because it's on the calendar, because.
Oh, yeah, didn't we
Six.
decide that, somebody said they didn't like doing it on voting days?
Yeah, our select board meeting is the day after elections in November, so.
Yeah, we did
Let's
talk
do
about
November
that.
6th for that. And for now, we're going to table I think we should, until you raise the red flag, we're ready to really have this workshop on the website. We'll
Yep.
schedule that. And probably at the same time, we're scheduling the priorities and goals for the select board. All right.
I hate
Not
to,
already raising the red flag? I got the
I don't
red
know, are
flag
you?
feeling
Are
from
you
you.
ready?
I feel like I need some input, and I would say that if,
We can't make additional progress unless we want to either say, just go ahead and we'll hope for the best.
because
or-
the problem is, once the site map is done, they begin content migration, and we have to pay extra for changes to the site map.
Although, we really should be able to change those things on,
We can change it, but like the way everything's fundamentally organized.
Just having a little trouble trying to define this workshop. I don't see it as a select board workshop. 'Cause
Probably not.
Believe me, you don't want my input. But.
Bob, I always want your input.
Thank you.
you don't have to come.
Well, I would, just for the fun of it. But, no, I'm serious. you want to open to the public. I get that. If you just want to have a public workshop, you if you think it's now, then raise the flag now. If you don't, we can do it next time.
I mean, I do feel a little uncomfortable being the only one making any decisions on
Oh,
this,
I got
given,
that. I
yeah.
got that. So, yeah, that's fine.
Can we get, even get revised to Skype in or something? Can we, so that we can get some clear answers also about, because this keeps coming up even with just our conversations of what really is, what will we be able to change later? Show us how the back end is going to work so that we can conceptualize what's
Give me some
urgent.
physical look at what it's characterized to be now.
Well, this whole idea that, like, right now with our website, we can't change a picture
Right.
without, there is no, but the whole purpose of going to this new, well, one of the purposes of going to the new company was that we would actually we'd be able to change things ourselves.
The backgrounds and stuff like that.
The background, and if you, okay, new page
Oh.
that's called this, or we want to change the image here, or we want to, I mean, Janice does remarkably well with, she can change some things on the website now, but the idea that we can't add a pop-up window later, or add a new widget, or, I think we should have them
Okay.
be virtually available, and that
Yes. I think it's important. Do
kind
you,
of like a speak now or forever hold your peace with the public a little
do
too.
you actually have something you can show the public that's,
Yes.
where, okay, if you have something. If you-
Sort of.
If you don't have a visual, you're sitting talking about things, you're not going to get specific direction.
We also have we have our current website, which
Mm-hmm.
is a reasonable visual in some ways. Which of these, are all these pages essential? Is this the way,
If you like it or don't like it.
how do you, so somebody can come and just say, I just want to make sure that I can go and find the select board agenda. I want to be able to go and find the calendar. Please don't mess with the, this.
That was some
or
great
that.
feedback we did get from
Yes.
people
We did.
pretty early on, which
did.
was very helpful.
Do you want to schedule something for an evening so that people can possibly attend?
Makes sense.
That would be most,
I mean,
We could just do it we could start our next select board meeting early or something. Oh, that's going to be is that the?
that's a long one. We could do November 6th.
You just embedded Lincoln Bill to the 6th as well.
Yeah, but that's during the meeting. She's talking, I think you mentioned before the meeting, you're talking like at 5 o'clock or 5:30.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could pull up or
We
even
could do that.
6, pull up what we have, and,
Why don't we look to doing it before the meeting
I
on the
mean,
6th?
and I'm gonna speak with the developer that's doing the site map, because maybe it's not necessary, like, maybe I can just move forward with finalizing the site map and then,
Then have the meeting?
yeah.
Thought about doing it before a board meeting, like, it feels like
Yeah.
this is something that,
yeah, I'm going to
Could-
regret that later.
yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Why don't you get that feedback and let us know that we can schedule it, okay?
Absolutely.
All right.
Bob, can I add one thing to
Yeah.
the manager's update?
Yep,
DOT Rawson Avenue Bridge,
yep,
DOT's doing a meeting.
Yep.
Public meeting on that. It's going to take place on Wednesday, August 30th at 6 o'clock.
October.
August 30th,
October.
Wednesday at 6
October.
o'clock. Oh, I'm sorry, October, at 6 o'clock.
Right, here.
Here.
Yeah,
When is
understood.
that again?
October 30th,
30th,
6 o'clock, here.
here, at the.
Oh, that's an important
Yeah,
update.
And they understand how important pedestrian
yep,
crossing is there for us.
6 PM.
Yes.
All right, thank you, Jeremy.
Yep.
Going-
Town calendar and all that stuff.
Sure, sure.
And Susan hopefully Susan heard. All the other people out there.
Yeah, we'll
that's an
advertise it,
important one.
yeah. I was aware of it, but I don't think anybody else is. We're going to table the board minutes because the September 17th minutes aren't in the packet. With that said, I will go to the consent agenda. This evening, there are two items, general items on the consent agenda. First is the consideration of renewal of victual license for, and lodging licenses for Captain Swift Inn, Cedar Crest Inn, Drift, and Peter Otts. That's item one. Item two is the adoption of a resolution for membership and appointment of a voting delegate, specifically Audra Kaler Bell, to the Main Service Center Coalition, which is a coalition of towns getting together to try to figure out how to get a better apportionment of taxes from the state.
Can we I'd like to pull that off of the.
We can pull it off the agenda. That said, are there any objectives to the first item on the agenda? Not hearing any of that hereby adopted. Now going to a new agenda item, which is the adoption of resolution for membership and appointment of voting delegate Audra to the Main Services Center Coalition.
No, no objection.
Well, I'd like to talk about it. Is this, are we already members? This sounds like one of those things that, can you give an overview from your perspective about, I read the letter, but it feels like you never quite know what these organizations are gonna lobby for
So
or
this,
against.
this was formed years ago now. I think Roberta participated when she was here. And really, it's an organization that formed amongst the service center communities in Maine that were frustrated with the fact that as a service center, they host the majority of jobs and workers and not-for-profit agencies and, you know, provide a lot of services that aren't paid for because typically, you know, people who come into town to work in an area aren't paying property taxes, but they're using the service, they throw away garbage, they use the wastewater system. There's a lot of not-for-profits in service centers that, of course, don't pay taxes. So really, their purpose is advocating for policy changes on a state level that recognize the fact that service centers don't always have a very sustainable way to fund themselves.
And what are the things that they're thinking of lobbying for or against in the coming?
Well, that's the thing, I don't know. I've been asked to be on the board, and so I'll find out. I think the next meeting is like the 16th of October.
So this doesn't have anything to do with the school funding stuff?
No.
The raise the floor or
No.
ceiling or whatever? Raise the
What's the
floor.
floor, wasn't it?
Yeah,
What's
raise the
the floor?
floor.
No, I agree.
They would be more, you know, that group is one who would be strong advocates of like local option sales tax and that sort of thing. Yes.
And increasing revenue sharing, yeah.
Revenue sharing sounds like the big
Everybody's
piece
for
of it.
revenue sharing and nobody.
But they're more interested in local option sales tax than
Us.
revenue sharing because of the fact that the service center communities are the ones who generate a lot of the, you know, sales tax revenue.
I'd be more interested in
focus on
having you be
that.
part of it and be informed about it, and maybe we can have a say, even if
Oh,
we don't
good
like.
questions.
So
Again,
you'd be a voting delegate?
Yes.
that would be, have to be our action tonight to approve Audra as our voting delegate for this Maine Service Center Coalition, which, as I said earlier, it sounds like it's a non-political entity.
It's quite political.
Well,
I mean,
Organization.
Yeah.
Well, that gets to your point about lobbying and there are certain things that are political to the town level, but not the state or federal level. That's different. They're different political levels.
it's a select group of municipalities with similar interests trying to advocate for state level policy changes.
Did it affect the towns?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
How, or does every town get a voting delegate? How do they work that out?
Every member does, but I've been asked to be on the board. So in addition to just being a voting delegate, I'll have some say over the policy agenda.
Who asks you to be on the board?
Bill Briggio's the president, Bill Briggio's the city manager of Augusta, and he asked me if I'd participate.
So then they vote on, the board vote? How do new board members get chosen?
I don't know. I didn't ask him too much about that.
I suspect they have to be nominated amongst the group.
That's what I'm guessing.
We're not choosing you for that.
Well, the
We
forms,
probably can't, right?
the form we're signing, if we approve it, is to nominate Audra as our delegate,
Yep.
period. You can't have an alternate, as I read it, but it says the delegate. And that's all it says.
Yeah.
The board member thing is above and
Yeah.
beyond, probably.
It's not part of the documentation at this point. Mark?
Should we designate Jeremy as our alternate in case Audra can't make a meeting?
Oh, do we have to?
You don't have to.
I think a lot of the voting's done by mail.
It is too.
By mail.
Not for the board, but for like the official delegate.
As far as I can see, this is a no-brainer. You know, actually having her on the board, you know, in a community of municipalities
I'm
that
all for
are
it.
looking to, you know, bring more funds into the towns from the state coffers. I think this is a great thing.
It's just sometimes you don't know where it's coming from is the
Yeah,
problem.
that's
So
an
it's
excellent
robbing
question.
from, Maine care so
Yeah.
that rich towns can have more
Well, and I mean,
Trash cans,
Camden's
which-
one thing, but coming from Rockland, like, there are some
Right, Rockland
serious
actually really-
inequalities in,
Yeah,
you
there
know,
are.
in funding for service
Yeah.
centers like our neighbors to the
Yep,
south.
South, yep, I agree.
But then again, even if that's so, having somebody representing us that's more in charge of what's going on gives us a better voice in making sure that things are fair.
Right, but it's the money that we pay. How much are our dues?
12 cents per resident.
Per capita, yeah.
Can you do the math really quickly for me, please?
Yeah, that's $600.
600?
Okay.
Need a
Need a
calculator?
motion?
Right, and that's
Missed
money
that
that
before I
will be used
ran
for
it.
lot. It sounds great, local
Calculator.
option sale, I'm all for it.
All
I
right.
just don't want to raise the floor.
$600.
I think that, yeah, good questions, I think excellent questions.
I'm also on the board of MUBEC, the State
Right.
Building and Standards Code Board, and I represent the Maine Service Center Coalition on that board, just so you know.
That's the
Interesting.
codes and standards.
Well represented.
Why don't we have to vote on that?
Yeah,
You don't have to vote on that. I was appointed, I was nominated by Bill Briggio and actually appointed by Governor LePage.
we will,
So they choose from within the membership of,
yeah, that's pretty
Correct.
typical. Motion?
We
One of
we
those
need a
other-
motion, it's on the consent agenda.
oh, we
I took
pulled
it
it.
off, I took it off.
I make a motion that we approve Audra as the voting delegate to the Maine Service Center Coalition.
Discussion,
And that we join and pay the dues and all that stuff, right?
that's all part of the document, yes, that's correct. Any more discussion?
No.
All's in favor? 4-0, since there's only four of us here. Next on the agenda would be the discussion and approval of two withdrawals, the next two items. Withdrawal of funds first from the winter reserve for the new track for the sidewalk plow. And I believe that's in our packet as to the amount that is.
1,000 something?
$436.20.
Did the track just break and it needs to be replaced?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's just at a point now where it needs,
They wear out.
yeah.
I move that we approve the request to tap into the winter reserve fund for a replacement track on the sidewalk plow in the amount of $4,436.20.
Second.
Any discussion? I'm not hearing any. All those in favor? 0. Next, another discussion of approval to withdraw funds from the Public Works Facility Reserve for the re-roofing the shed at the Public Works facility.
Hold on, that really big one? No.
This is, you know, the lean-to that comes off the side of the sand and salt shed? It's that lean-to area.
And that sand and salt shed is gonna stay, huh?
Why you want to tear it
I
down?
mean, it was gonna fall down before. We've heard reports of, you can't put solar panels on it because it could fall down any day, and now sounds like we're doubling down on just,
We're just re-roofing.
And it's not the
I
shed,
mean-
it's the lean-to.
but doesn't the lean-to connect?
Yeah, the lean-to
Connect,
does
but it's-
connect.
There's virtually no structural
It's
load.
actually leaning on the thing that,
The roof timbers are weighing on the vertical supports of the north side of the shed, yes.
oh, okay.
It's on the north side of the shed, as you're looking at to the right.
So, okay. I'm just, if we're so sure that the whole shed is gonna stay up and everything, it seems
Yes.
like we should look into the solar panel thing again, but
That's a good question. But anyhow,
I'm fine with it.
Yeah,
I
sure.
move that we approve the request to withdraw 11, no?
go ahead.
Oh, I thought I heard somebody.
I didn't know if you had the monies up, I have it up.
$11,040 from the Public Works Facility Reserve for the re-roofing of the lean-to shed roof.
Any discussion? Those in favor? 4-0. Thank you.
Forgot-
Thank
forgot
you
how to
very
do
much.
that.
That's quite all right. Next, we have a reconsideration actually, of the victual license for Hawksbill Kurafoto at 5 Bayview Landing. As you recall, we extended the license till tonight. So we need to move, or not, on the full year for the victual license for Hawksbill. Jeremy, do you want to just summarize?
Sure. We for the record, we worked with Matt Haskell, the owner, and his contractor, and they did enclose that chimney as per code requirements. That is done. They are finalizing the minor electrical issues that they have. They've got a contractor on board, and he's finishing that this week. Both Chris Farley and Steve Wilson have no issues with issuing the Victor's license.
So we still have the original Victoria's license in our packet, or the original report in our packet that advised
I understand.
The original,
conditional license?
the packet that, for the last select board is in the last select board of packets. That's the
Right.
only place it's in, Taylor. Their current application doesn't have it in it.
Yeah, I guess I'm being sure that, so everything that was in there that was conditional is being fixed or has been fixed.
Yes.
Yes.
Right, I'm not seeing the thing that says
No, I did.
everything's great.
I don't think it's been updated
There's,
at all.
in the last packet, the documentation had a stipulation of being conditional. The current packet has no stipulation of being conditional.
It is not conditional at this point.
Right, so the fire chief and, of course, the police chief wasn't there in the first place, are both suggesting there's
Yep.
no reason not to approve.
There's no reason not to approve it.
Just where, I was just wondering where it said that. I think Taylor was making,
Yeah, that was,
Point.
we just don't have any paperwork that says that. They're
well, you
still
ha-
working on it now. right?
You don't have any paperwork to suggest a conditional like the last time.
all I
Yeah, That's what I'm
have is the
asking.
conditional
It hasn't been
expiring
updated, it
October
still
8th.
says conditional in our packet today.
I see, I get you.
So there's what
I
I'm
got
saying
you,
is-
I got you.
Said
It doesn't have
conditional
to be a
until
big
October,
deal.
I think it said conditional until
October
October 8th.
We don't have anything in front of us that says, okay, this has been fixed, except for you saying.
It has
it's
all been fixed. You can trust me on this, and
I do, I'm just trying to be extra clear given
I
that,
appreciate that.
because there's been some hiccups along the
Yep.
way.
The only thing that says, you're right, Taylor, the only thing that says conditional until, it was my footnote to the page that says conditional until tonight.
October 8th.
Right, that's it. You're right.
I'll make a motion that we approve it based on that we trust Jeremy.
I think I'll skip the last part of that motion, but it's seconded. Do we have a discussion?
Yeah, we don't need the last part in there.
All those in favor? 4-0. Thank you very much for that clarification. I'm going to, if it's okay with the select board, put the public, since I don't see anybody here from either Peter Ross or Captain Swift, put it to the end of the agenda, and to bring up discussion on stormwater detention pond and harbor committee is the next two.
Sure.
So let's do our thing, Jeremy.
All right, and do you mind if I sit right here? Is this fine, rather than standing up
As long
there?
as you're in the speaker and we
All right.
can hear you.
Good. So I wrote a memo to you, and I can maybe summarize that a little bit. And how this all started, I was approached by a couple of homeowners in the Pleasant Ridge subdivision homeowners association that represents 12 property owners. A couple of months ago, there was some movement amongst the homeowners association to vote on whether to offer the property, which is the detention pond and a reserved green area in the subdivision, for sale. And so I was approached by a property owner, asked if that was permissible and what process they would need to go through to do that. And I advised, I think both the two gentlemen actually are here about how that process would work. And I did speak with Maureen Peabody, who is, or at least emailed back and forth with her, who is the chair of the association, and Ed Collins, who is the attorney representing the homeowners association. So I did some digging, and this subdivision is a 59-lot subdivision that started back on 75 acres. It started back in 73 were the first 34 lots. And then in 81, there were some lots redesigned and reapproved, and then there were some additional lots created in 83, and then more in 86, and then the final revision was done in 1995. And the site is regulated not only under town subdivision ordinances, but also under Maine Site Development, Site Location of Development Act permitting by the Maine Department of Environmental Protection. Subdivisions can be very complicated, especially when they're done over the course of 20 years. Again, this started in 73 and it was finalized, or they did the final build out in 95, final approval. And thanks for bringing up that map because I think it clearly shows one of the issues. Now, going back to this years of approvals, or multiple approvals, there were homeowners associations that were created, and they were responsible for maintenance of common areas and maintenance of stormwater infrastructure, et cetera. It appears that
Is the one that's in our packet better?
If you like drawings, it is.
Well,
If you
that
don't,
shows you
it
the
goes better.
subdivision plan. We can kind of go through both of them, but it appears that the final lots that were approved in 1995, the final 12 lots, which are those lots that are shown on that plan there, are the homeowners association for those lots are responsible for the detention pond and the green space and maintenance of it, maintenance of the detention pond and the green space, which is the pond there closest to Washington Street. Now, keep in mind, the town accepted the right-of-way, which means we also accepted the road ditches. We maintain the road ditches, we maintained the road. We just paved the roads all up through there last year, and they were in horrible shape prior. We just paved all that. So you got the 12 lots there, and not many of those lots are sending any water, if you look at the contours, to that detention pond. The majority of the water that I can tell, and by looking at topo and then talking with Andrew Hedrich from Gartley and Dorsey, the majority of the water is coming from lots up above. And there is, if you can see the reserved area, and maybe Allison, if you can go to the next plan, it's in that packet, yeah, right there. You can kind of see, I wish I had a pointer, but yeah, if you follow that upstream to the road, and then you cross the road, and you see that little stream drainage, though that's all in a reserved area that is responsibility of another homeowners association. So this pond that's down near Washington Street, again, is the responsibility that I can tell of just the 12 homeowners. It may be through more deed research and legal investigation that I'm not sure. It would take some time to figure it out, whether or not the other homeowners associations have some sort of responsibility in there as well. But it appears that just the 12 lots have that responsibility. Now, I mean, stormwater ponds, detention ponds, they manage stormwater quantity and quality. Generally, during construction on a project like this, would manage total suspended solids when this was originally permitted. But if you look at it, I mean, the outlet to that pond is about 215 feet away from Montgomery Lake, crossing under Washington Street. There's a culvert there. We manage, again, the right-of-way, we manage the ditches. So I was approached by some folks in the association whether or not the town may have an interest in ownership over that parcel, and then therefore the maintenance of the detention pond. I have had a lot of experience in my past jobs where detention ponds became orphaned, or they became they were not maintained. They became significant issues both from a quantity and quality control perspective. Because, again, residential subdivisions, people get the projects approved, and then they end up relying on homeowners associations to maintain and manage these things. Homeowners associations generally don't have the technical ability, technical know-how, or understanding of what a detention pond is, why it's needed, what kind of maintenance is needed on it. And so I did say to the folks that reached out that I would look into it, and whether or not the town does have an interest. If the town has an interest in taking ownership, that would be a town meeting issue. The town select board, you guys couldn't just make that decision. But it is very close to McGuntuck Lake.
It's really it's called the lake, but it's really
I
the
know.
river.
I get that.
It's a river, isn't it?
Impounded section.
Pond.
The pond.
Seabright Pond, it's called lots of
Yes.
different things, but
I get so confused.
it's funny how these maps are so
Yeah.
different.
Got it.
It's like the shirt tail area. It's definitely important. I mean,
Right.
it's definitely
Right.
important.
It is significantly important. The grades on this site, just so you know, I went out on the site with Dave St. Laurent and Andrew Hedrich. We did a walk of the site. We looked at the pond. We looked at the spillway. We looked at the riser on it. We looked at the outfalls and the inlets. Everything looks pretty good outside of a lack of maintenance. And unfortunately, I think what happens is over time, homeowners associations don't understand the real cost that goes into this over time. And I have no idea what the homeowners association collects in dues for this. But I would suggest that there's probably not enough money out there that should there be a catastrophic failure out there to deal with it. I don't suspect there will be one, nor does Andrew Hedrich. What we do know is that it does need to be maintained. I've been in contact with DEP on it. There's woody vegetation, alders all the way around the pond. Now, for a pond like this, to make sure it's stable and structurally sound, you cannot have woody vegetation growing up in that bank of that pond. I mean, this is not a natural pond. This is a man-made structure. Sorry.
Hold on.
And maybe I don't understand exactly what the pond, because woody vegetation is good in a lot of
Yes,
ways,
but woody vegetation, I mean,
What
it's,
is the pond made of?
Grass.
what do you mean, what is it
What
made of?
kind-
Material, what material's on the ground?
It's not just a dug.
Hole. With water.
Why can't we have trees and things growing in the bank?
Because there's a spillway, that is part of it. So in order to maintain the integrity of a spillway, you cannot have root systems going into that spillway, into that
Because
bank of that.
You mean there's a dam?
Culvert.
So it's, in essence, it's a bermed area, and then there's an emergency spillway should the riser and the pipe that drains it fail or have a problem, then that water needs to be able to, go around the outlet and get out. And so that's what the spillway is. So you need to maintain those ponds. The pond.
Dredged? A lot, the ones that, some of them do.
Now, I don't know, so this is where I would, if you have a desire to pursue this, I would try to work with the homeowners association, because I think they bear some responsibility for working with us if the town would take ownership over it to kind of get a baseline of what the pond status is. And so, I mean, we did not go out and measure water depths and all that. Now, the real time that a pond would get filled in with sediment and the like would be during construction, or if we had, construction of homes and lots, and if we had, ditch work that was done up there, and there, we didn't implement any erosion controls, and we had, severe gully erosion in ditches, and we dumped a lot of material down into the pond.
Just the
There was
road
no
stands,
evidence.
the one at Midco Solid Waste has to get ditched, has to get excavated
Because
fairly
of the
often.
winter sand stuff on the road.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what people use on their driveways and all kinds of things.
Yeah.
See.
I will say that there does not appear to be a lot of evidence of much sedimentation down in there, and Andrew advised the same thing. I mean, we looked at the inlet. So right where Goodwin Lane is, where that little stream shows on this, is the blue line stream crosses. Right, there's a pipe, culvert with an outlet, spillway, plunge pool in essence, and it's armored. There was no evidence of any significant sedimentation in that area, and there was no gully erosion going down the hill, because it is a steep slope. It's definitely a steep slope going down the hill off Goodwin Lane. So as far as assessing whether or not it needs to be dredged,
Well,
we could figure that out.
Sorry?
Do they want to give it to us, or do they want us to buy it?
Well, there is the homeowners association treasurer is here, and as is,
Before we get into that, let's have
Yes.
questions about this
Sure.
retention pond. Has it been approved by DEP?
yes, so this project went through site law permitting, Site Location of Development Act permitting. What should have happened, and I don't believe it has happened, if the homeowners association has ownership over this currently, there should have been a modification done or a minor amendment to change ownership. It's a one-page form.
Right.
Now, those kinds of things happen all the time where a homeowner's issue, they just don't know, the developer doesn't share it, DEP doesn't follow up on this stuff. So technically, they probably should have had a change of ownership on this already. But DEP, this was a DEP reviewed pond, DEP reviewed subdivision. Should the town not want to entertain taking ownership over, it's almost 3 acres. It's a pretty significant parcel, I think, in terms of water quality protection because of its proximity to the resource.
What is, but I'm trying to drive at is, what is its current condition? I heard you say in your report, you mentioned its current condition isn't quite where it should be.
Right, and that's DEP's perspective, and DEP's perspective is that it appears to not have been maintained. They have not been out on the site. They're looking at aerial photos. So when they say that, they know that there's woody vegetation growing out around on the banks, and though that vegetation needs to be
So
maintained.
whoever owns this piece of property, that needs to be done.
Yes, so if this did transfer, whether to the town or another entity, then a DEP site location permit modification would need to be done, and DEP wants verification that the spillway was constructed as it was approved, and that was a retrofit that was needed, and that it's being maintained. And if we do assume ownership over it, as would any other entity takes ownership over it, we would need to modify the site location permit. And then you get triggered into this whole piece of, under state stormwater law and site law now, you have maintenance requirements. So what they're doing is they're reaching back to projects that were permitted years ago
Right.
that come in for new ownership changes and saying, okay, what you guys need to do is you need to, so a project like this, if this was built today, you would need to do a 5-year recertification
Right.
that your site is in compliance with the DEP permitting, which is really stormwater permitting. So that really, what that entails is you would have to do, the town, if we ended up owning it, we would have to do an annual inspection. And Dave St. Laurent and myself, I used to do them in Bangor, Dave St. Laurent can do them here. You do an annual inspection and you keep a log. That would likely cost us a couple $100 a year to do that. And then every 5th year, you need to do a recertification with DEP, and that's where an engineer has to do it.
Do an
So
evaluation, yeah.
that would be more like a $500 to $1,000 every 5 years to recertify it.
So summarize it, no matter who owns it, something has to be, some dollars has to be spent now to
Yes, to be in compliance
be
with
in compliance, whatever that-
DEP
whatever, I
site
don't know.
permitting,
We
correct.
Probably don't know what that is,
Yeah.
but somebody has to do that.
Yep.
Secondly, somebody has to do some limited maintenance on an annual basis, and this check, doesn't sound, just checking of the site every year.
Right, which means you look at this, you look at the spillway, nothing's failing, you look at the inlet, nothing's scouring, you look at the outlet, everything looks good.
Right, is there any maintenance beyond that?
Other than once the pond, the woody vegetation around the immediate banks of the pond are dealt with, there would just be likely maintenance of going in there like we do at the tannery, right? We have the area where we have the cap, the existing slurry wall, and it grows up with vegetation, and every couple of years we come in and mow it. We'd have to just mow down that vegetation around. Generally, it's going to be on the downhill side of that pond, the spillway area.
Is it fair to state, no matter to what we just said about fixing it now and the annual, no matter who owns it, it has to be done? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Now,
I know
would
how many-
would DEP come in and enforce that on someone? I doubt it. I mean, I'm just being honest.
Do we know how many privately owned detention ponds like this are out there that we don't control in town?
I don't.
Okay.
And I mean, I guess that's a good question. Are we creating
Policy?
a policy? I mean,
Setting a precedent.
setting a precedent, I think you have to look at ponds on a case-by-case basis. And I look at it, again, from a water quality perspective. And, we've got 75 acres, not all of it's draining to this, but it's a 75-acre subdivision. A lot of the water is draining to this area via our conveyances. I mean, they're in our ditches. A lot of that water is in our ditches and then gets into this pond, which, we maintain the ditches, we maintain the outlet pipe, but we don't have any responsibility for maintaining what's down below, and that is a little troublesome. I don't think
We
any
have sand on the
homeowners.
roads that goes in there.
Right. I don't think any homeowner association is capable or prepared to deal with anything like this.
Okay,
honestly.
let me ask some questions. Number one, what would the annual cost, once it's brought up to where it needs to be legally with DOT now, however that's done? And what would be the annual maintenance cost, do you think?
And that's DEP, not DOT, but I get it. I just, for clarification, I talked to Andrew Hedges about this, and he said about $200 a year to do the annual inspection that needs to be done, so you could do the 5-year recertification.
Okay. And what about the annual maintenance? Keep it.
Again, once, and if the town entertained this, I would hope that the homeowners association would do the initial maintenance and get it up to a certain point that then the town could say, okay, and get an engineer to sign off on it. Starting from this point on, the town will maintain it in a certain way, and that would be really, again, just looking at maintaining. It's probably on a 3-year basis once it's down to that vegetation removed, to keep the alders and that woody vegetation growth down off the banks.
Okay, so let me comment, Audra, how involved would it be to get our people to maintain that? How much additional work would it be for them? And what kind of a problem would that be?
I mean, it's really hard to say exactly.
But you've got machine time, probably machine time and some limited machine time, whatever, the machinery, and then labor, probably a day or so or 2 hours.
Oh, max day. The pond's not that big.
Yeah.
We contract out for, or is this something that Public Works can maintain?
We have Public Works or Parks and Rec.
Allison?
Well,
I'm sorry,
not
Mark.
finished.
She hasn't finished yet.
So it seems to me if we're supposed to take it over and we have to think about, I've already had one person today tell me, why are we taking over somebody's personal property and maintain it so that they get off the hook, so it's something we have to be aware of. But what would it cost for the homeowners association to get it up to where the DEP would sign off on it and say, okay, from now on, it's up to where it should be and maintenance should take care of it?
That's a good question. I'm not prepared to answer that, I guess. Chris Mulville, I think that's how you pronounce your name, Chris? Mulvihill, may be able to answer that question. I believe the homeowners association was looking to have that work done as I started down this road. Because I'm again, they were looking at selling this, and this issue came up about the maintenance of it. So I think they have reached out to try to get someone to look at it.
Okay, can I ask him?
I mean, before we get into like the money
Right.
part, can I ask, I mean,
Are
I
you
think,
finished, Mark?
Let Allison go
Sorry,
next.
go ahead, Allison.
I mean, I think we should be careful about trying to quantify it in terms of the maintenance costs of this pond. Looking at it from the perspective of we have a few subdivisions in town that have stormwater management plans that have broken down, and it's very difficult to try to figure out where this is all coming from. A lot of them that don't have stormwater ponds, and you see all of a sudden, you see the river is a normal color, and then you get to a spot in the river where it's all just coming in brown. And you go back, and I spend tons of time, every time it rains, trying to figure out where the dirty water is coming from. And then I come in and I talk to Jeannie, and she says, well, there was a subdivision back in there that I don't know if they're following their stormwater plan or not. And it's kind of like a detective game, and it's very difficult. And then we're like, well, can we look back in there? This is private property. It's very difficult to monitor where all of these problems are coming from. To me, looking at the size of this drainage basin, where, all of the water that's coming into this spot, it's not, I think Jeremy's exactly right, it's not so much about these 12 parcels that currently control the pond. It's water coming in from our town roads and from a bunch of other parcels, and then that's its final stop before it goes into a treasured resource that we're already having problems with. It's also, as we know, like looking at climate change, we know we're going to have increased rain events. We know the magnitude of the 100-year storm is increasing. We're already scrambling, trying to look for ways that we can implement more green infrastructure so that the ground can absorb more water before it just rushes down into Camden, into downtown Camden and, floods the mill or floods this or that. So if it were town-owned, I mean, this is the kind of, it makes all the sense in the world for it to be town-owned. It's also kind of a nice wildlife refuge that would be protected if the town owned it, at least in theory. And it would be easier for, right now, if we suspect a problem with the pond, it's like you're crossing into private property and it's this confusing thing, but I think
It's a hard thing to
actually kind of a nice
enforce.
opportunity. There are also probably a lot of better ways that the pond could be designed in maybe a more natural way that didn't require some of the man-made features. A lot has been learned over the years in terms of detention ponds and how they can be better. So I'm supportive of it.
Taylor?
I'm wondering if you or the homeowners wanted to speak tonight to make clear some of this up for us.
I just want to get all our comments out first, we haven't finished with that.
I'll comment after
Right, they
I
might.
hear
they
all the
might- they
information.
might, yeah.
All right, whoever wants to speak from the homeowners association?
Well,
You got to go up here.
Got to come up
Yeah,
to the
come up
mic
here.
and push the button so the mic turns green.
Thank you.
Thank you.
okay, thank you. I'm Michael Carita. I'm the dreaded abutter on this parcel. I could not agree more with everything you said. Different times of year, high water, it looks like white water running down into that detention pond, which goes directly into the river. And I do think you're going to see problematic issues over time. Also, just to let you in on the HOA process, they're debating whether, if the town won't take it, can we sell it and make a building lot? Those are the two options there. I feel the character of Camden lends itself to one and not the other. I don't need to get into that here, but I do want to make it clear as a personal concern that if the town is not involved in supervising this, you have an HOA kind of pushing their own agenda, a very small HOA too. So, thank you.
Oh, sure.
Which is a problem. We see that with the
Which abutter are
dams.
you?
Which owner?
Here or
One.
here.
Yes, correct.
On the corner?
Nope, back there, yeah.
On the corner?
I'm that problem abutter right there.
See.
Are you in a big problem? Are you?
You guys haven't seen me in here before, so I hope not, but.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So the idea isn't, like, maybe we can get the town to buy this for a couple $100,000. It's, the idea would be taking over. It's kind of, it reminds me of the bog, actually.
It does, and that's a very good point. And I just, like, Mark, you were asking about, what if other taxpayers in town say, why should we take ownership over this? I mean, that's a good question. That said, we took over the bog for this very reason.
We paid $75,000 or $80,000 for that because it was such a strategic water quality interest.
Yeah.
That, I mean, it was actually a smart thing to do.
And, I mean, I will say, like, we had a staff meeting the other day, maybe before Chris can talk, and I asked Dave Bolstridge a question about whether or not he saw on the horizon, whether or not EPA was going to start coming down to towns the size of like Camden. Right now, they're hitting, if you're an MS4 community, that is,
Right.
there are certain communities and certain regions in the state that are MS4 communities, and you as a town, municipality, if you're an MS4, you are responsible for all of the water.
Right,
So if it's draining off of a commercial subdivision,
Right.
town's responsible.
right.
And you got to implement ordinances and enforcement mechanisms to deal with those specific issues. Because I foresee at some point, potentially, I mean, who knows where EPA is going? I don't envision it soon. But you never know where we could end up. And if we end up having to manage all the water that enters into every conveyance, every ditch that gets into a resource, that is a long, hard task to implement.
Oh, yeah.
And when we have an opportunity, in my view, if we have an opportunity to, take ownership over some detention ponds or some stormwater infrastructure, I think we should look at those options very seriously.
I'd say that that's kind of one of the main points that was raised at the previous town meeting in June, was a concern about our drainage infrastructure.
Sure,
And
sure.
I think that we need to start looking at it much more carefully.
I would
We're
agree.
starting to look at Belmont.
I would agree.
Belmont Ave area.
Proactively.
Yes.
Not,
Kind of an exciting opportunity.
not
This is a nice
reactively.
little
That's-
parcel.
It's a nice parcel, and there's public access off of, I mean, well, not public, there is an access, it may be public at some point, but there is an access off of Washington Street. There's a sewer line, we actually have a sewer line that runs right up through there, too.
Yeah,
Oh, there's town sewer up there? In the whole subdivision? Oh, that's great.
yeah.
And maybe you want to talk,
Did you,
get some thoughts from Chris, too, I don't know.
I'm very hard of hearing, so bear with me. Sure. I don't really have a prepared statement, but if you have questions, I can answer just about anything. I'm appearing as a private homeowner, though not as a treasurer. I have no authority to do that.
makes sense, makes
So-
sense. I don't have.
And they are voting tomorrow, I think there's a vote
it's a-
scheduled for tomorrow.
What are you voting on?
Sorry?
What's the vote tomorrow that you're,
The vote tomorrow is to whether to proceed with selling the property.
or just, or continuing to discuss things with the town?
More time, please.
Do they
If you
know
don't,
about the
if you don't sell it, the other option is what we're talking about
What we're
right
trying to
now.
do is look at the most equitable
Sure.
opportunity. And,
Yep.
and it seems like this, something in this order would be better than selling it as a building lot for the people who are there and for everyone in the town. And so what we're it's looking at is all the options, but we have a liability that is open-ended. We have a financial liability that is increasing and growing with all the compliance and reporting and inspections that are going on now with the DEP, and we're afraid, so we have to do something.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Taylor, did you have any questions?
I had no questions. I mean, I know I'll have more as there's a lot of due diligence, I think, that's left to be done with this. Or maybe it seems like a lot and hopefully it ends up being very simple. But I think I had an opportunity to pick Jeremy's brain about this yesterday and look at the maps and I think that Allison kind of hit the nail on the head, like the upfront cost, it would be something to work out, to get it to a point where it's comfortable, but I think the long-term benefit certainly outweighs a couple $100 a year to keep it maintained or at least go look at it. Having control over something like this is something that I think is going to make our lives a lot easier down the road. So, on the surface of it, I'm definitely in favor of it, but we have some due diligence to do.
Right. Yeah, it seems, Mark, do you have anything else?
I was just going to say, if they're willing to turn it over to us, then they give up the liability and the long-term problems that you just talked about. But then we accept that liability and stuff like that. So I think I'd be interested in seeing them bring it up to standards it needs to be now and then turn it over to us as good, but not that we pay any sort of substantial monies for it, because we're accepting, I don't think we need to pay to take on a liability in a long-term cost.
And I would have to agree. I think, yeah, I am concerned about precedent in general, but that's minor, the way you explained it. But it seems to me there is one, as Mark mentioned, a front-end cost of bringing this where it should be. That needs to be defined. The town shouldn't be taking on and putting a burden on the taxpayers to do something the homeowners association, the development should have done in the first place. That's kind of written and known. It's not unknown. Because DEP didn't check it every year, and as you suggested, they don't. I know that. But because it's not in conformance, that's a problem. That needs to be defined. Two, I think if the town were to take it over, and I keep hearing this $200 a year, then I would presume the homeowners associations wouldn't have a problem with giving us $200 a year to cover that stipend. It's such a small number. I don't believe it, by the way. But that would be something I think the town should look at as an alternative arrangement, long-term arrangement with the homeowners of this group. That sets a good precedent going forward. Again, I'm a little concerned that $200 is too small for annual costs for this detention pond.
Yeah, and just to clarify, that $200 that I was referring to was the $200 it would cost to do the annual inspection
Got that, so-
and not annual maintenance.
And I don't believe the annual maintenance would be that much.
Nor do
once
I. I
once
think it's going
brought
to
up
be,
what it
once it's
should
going to be brought to where it should
If
be.
it's brought to the town with that work having been done, paid for at least, been done, and then the town takes it over, if the amount of money we're talking about here might be $1,000 a year.
Agreed.
I want to look at it actually and see there may be a better way to do it. We might be able to get a grant even to make this a
Maybe.
cool thing that restores some kind of habitat for
Yeah.
a rare bird, or I don't know.
I get that. I would just add that this is a Site Location of Development Act subdivision, so anytime we want to do anything with it, we have to modify the site permit.
Yep.
And that's not necessarily inexpensive.
Jeremy, do you have
Can
a,
you say that whole thing again?
Yes, so this subdivision is part of a main Site Location of Development Act subdivision. So this is regulated by DEP, not because of its proximity to a resource, but it's regulated by DEP because of the size of the parcel. Okay? And so they have an existing permit. If we want to make that pond larger or tweak it for whatever reason, we have to go through DEP permitting to do that.
Right.
And there is a cost associated with that. There's a cost associated with modifying the permit. So
Sure.
for the homeowners association to transfer it to us, DEP, right, they want to make sure that, they want to sign off that it's maintained appropriately and was built appropriately. We've got drawings that show a lot of that. So I think that's not hard, but that, I don't feel like that cost should be borne by the town.
Well, in
But
some,
what about these other, what I don't understand, I think we need to investigate more the other parcels that actually drain into,
the lake,
I mean, maybe it just needs to be removed from the subdivision
That's what I'm thinking.
entirely, because
That's
it
what I'm
seems like
thinking.
it wasn't necessarily appropriate.
Yeah, once you're in site law, you cannot remove site law.
right.
do you, and without
I'm
necessarily-
just telling you. I have worked on site law projects. I've worked on site law projects for a long time. Once you're in, you're in.
Taylor?
I'm just curious if we are interested in at least hearing more about this, if you have a thought on a smart path forward in terms of next steps on gathering.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're interested in moving forward on this, then I think you should do a motion in some fashion that says, because I think the homeowners association, I'm going to reach out to Maureen and Ed tomorrow morning and tell them what action, I told them they could watch tonight, but what action the town took, because that, they're going to take that, I would hope they would take that to the homeowners association meeting tomorrow night, and on the table is to sell it as a developable lot. If the town comes forward and you guys make a motion that says the town has serious interest in obtaining ownership over this, working with the homeowners association to transfer it to the town, then I think that's the type of motion you,
Well, serious interest, it was something, we can't buy it. We have to go to a town meeting.
correct.
So we can say we have a serious interest, and they still are faced with a dilemma.
Well, they're faced with a dilemma that
But the
gets them to June.
But my point is, serious interest should be at no cost to the taxpayers.
A realized cost.
I mean, there's a cost to the taxpayers when we have catastrophic events in the river. We spend money all the time trying to track pollution
I mean-
in the river and the harbor.
Think
So
of-
trying to be a little bit proactive, sometimes,
Right.
the taxpayers collectively decided it was worth it to pay 75, I forget whether it's 75 or $80,000 for the bog. And so I don't want to go on record saying has to be at no cost, because I think it may end up preventing future costs. So we obviously need more information
That's-
before it can be presented to voters, but the
We
theory
need more
of it,
information before the select board can make a decision, because we're making we're making a.
not making any
Well, if you make a
we would be
motion,
willing to put it to voters.
well, that's.
Right.
Is there any sense of urgency, other than, the only decision that we're up against is whether or not you guys sell it or not, is that correct?
I would say that's a sense of urgency.
Right, but it's kind of a false sense of urgency in that you guys have 100% control over that.
Correct.
The HOA does.
The vote will have 100% control.
Right,
So tomorrow's vote is very real, and do you want that to go up for sale for construction and development and having one owner over the stormwater? Or do you want to put it in the town vote?
Right. So I think I see what Bob's getting at. The reason I bring it up is I don't think that we're in a position to be able to make a definitive position tonight ahead of your meeting tomorrow to give you guys enough sense that, we can absolutely move forward with this. I mean,
The only absolute is at town meeting, right?
Correct.
That's the
That's
absolute.
my
But
point.
in order to get to town meeting, to bring a good plan to the town meeting, I think we need to have a good working relationship with the HOA and that they understand that the town, in good faith, will look at this option once we understand the full costs that are associated
Jeremy,
with it.
that's exactly the key I'm driving at. We need to have a
Hey,
better
there's a motion.
better understanding of what we're looking at in terms of this package. We don't have control of it. We don't have any quantification of what this might cost the town, even if it's justified. We have no idea. We know that it has a problem right now, that we don't even know the quantification of that amount. What if it turns out to be a huge amount? I don't think it would.
We're
but-
not there, so I would see multiple steps here, that we would be, just like we do many times, we vote to encourage town staff to investigate further, to get more information, rather than voting sometimes to say, no, this is not something we want to pursue at all, no time, none of Jeremy's time should go toward this.
Right.
So we can say, yeah, in theory, this makes a lot of sense. This is something we're interested in pursuing. We see benefits for the town. And so we would vote on that tonight. The next opportunity to vote would be when we decide to actually put it on the ballot. That takes an additional vote. That would be after we get all this information. But I think it's
Correct.
really important that they be able to go back to
You're correct.
the homeowners association and say, yeah, in theory, the town is really interested in working with us. This is a very viable
Yeah.
option. They know
No,
that we
you-
can't, there are still multiple steps
I
before
just,
it would be a
that's why,
definite
that's why I
yes.
want to be very clear. When I heard was recommended, the motion would be that we were anxious, well, not anxious, we want to take this town meeting. That is not something I'm willing to vote on tonight.
right.
We're
The
not voting
motion,
on that because
the
there's no
motion should be
language.
to direct town staff to continue to investigate.
Absolutely.
um,
Absolutely.
And see
Absolutely.
where this
I'd like it if it was a little more defined, like that the town staff would work with the homeowners association to determine a path forward, including costs that would be borne by the association as well as the town.
That's perfect.
So moved.
You don't want to repeat that?
Second.
I mean, what,
No, I'm only kidding you. Second.
I saw
Any-
Carol's face and she was
any-
like,
Any further discussion?
Get that quick?
Yeah, just
Write it down for her.
to be clear, that
Get that,
the
Kendall?
reason that I brought that up is I want to understand that, the sense of urgency surrounding this and everything that goes into that. And I think that the big picture, I am definitely supportive in the idea of having control over this, and the town is in a much better position to be able to maintain this than the private HOA. But I want to make sure that we're not putting ourselves in a position where we didn't look at everything and have all the answers before we.
Well spoken.
Worried the homeowners
Just, I'm sorry, I just want to lose something here. Jeremy, could you repeat that for Kendall so she gets it down? Are you trying to recraft
we need
it?
to we could also
He
reword
can
it.
write it out
There's a
and-
how many people are in the homeowners association?
You know what you meant.
There are 9 voting lots right now, so that when I mention a sense of urgency, I only speak to the fact that it's a very small association.
Yep.
and
5 people could decide to sell the lot.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So,
I get it.
I think it's, and I'm speaking for myself here, not for the HOA, but being able to say anything viable and in good faith is happening with the town,
Right.
at least I believe will alleviate some of that sense of urgency. And I don't want to appear here in June talking about, well, there's a 4,500 square foot house going up in your stormwater area.
No, I think you heard clearly, just to summarize it, the motion on the table really is to continue to investigate, to continue to put more flesh on the bone so the town can make a logical decision and recommend it to the voters. That's really what's on the table. So is any more discussion on that motion?
Nope.
All those in favor? Opposed?
Did you just make your own new motion?
No, that was the same one you made, and
Yeah,
you,
Jeremy's was a
you
little.
got a little, well, no, it was a good one. He was, I can paraphrase Jeremy as I understood it, was to, the select board we've already voted on, authorized the town to spend more time investigating the potential use of the I'm
town
sorry,
pursuing
the
ownership of detention
ownership
pond?
and to continue evaluation of the associated costs that may be associated.
Costs and benefits.
Benefits that may be associated with that transfer of property to the town. That's really what, and that's what, that's
One other thing I want to
what I
mention.
think we voted on.
For you guys? Would that suffice, do you think?
One other thing I'm curious about is knowing the situation of the pond, potential liability. I wonder who would be willing to buy it to do, it's one thing to sell lots of property to put houses up before you know about the liability that you're accepting when you buy those houses. You know, that, I don't know
Well,
that anybody,
Jeremy, to cite law, Jeremy, to cite law, can that detention pond lot be changed to a house lot?
Yes. Yeah, and DEP doesn't frankly care who's responsible as long as it's in the deed that says who's responsible to
So the
maintain it.
person,
I'd like to buy it.
there
Maybe
you
that would
go,
be
there you
the.
go. So the person that acquired,
Butter comes into play.
I might too. So the person would be responsible for the detention element on that 3 acres. Okay. Well, we already voted on what you just said, so I think it's pretty clear, and thank you.
That I'll work
There
with
are
the
questions that need to be
homeowners
answered.
association on pursuing town ownership, including the costs there and our costs now and in the
We're pursuing
future.
evaluating the town ownership and the costs associated with it. That will help.
Costs and benefits.
And benefits, absolutely, benefits too, absolutely. Yeah, there are a lot of benefits to it, I totally agree. All right. I totally agree.
Go out there and it's not, can I go out there with you sometime? Can we
Sure.
Look around and.
Yep.
All right, so, great, thank you, gentlemen. So we're going to need to move on the agenda with, tonight we have with us the couple of members of the Harbor Committee, including
Thank you.
the chair, vice chair, and Kathy Young is a member. So, Mark, do you want to take the floor or
Thank you.
to discuss the Harbor Committee work plan for the balance of the year?
Okay. So what we did is we identified the topics of importance as they were outlined in the comprehensive plan. And what you have is the work plan with 4 different categories. Public access was the first in the comprehensive plan. So what we'd like to do is discuss ways to increase public use and access of the harbor. And that's fairly broad. I mean, there's several opportunities there. The other item would be review the T.Y. Lynn Public Landing Report that was done in 2013. And their ideas of the public access for the public landing. So, and the next item was harbor use and management. Under that, we've got mooring management, review current information and management practices, review software options and necessities, create a history report of the number of moorings each year for the past 10 years and history of increases, decreases, and unavailabilities for residents to have, to get a mooring in the town.
That would be like length of waiting lists and stuff.
Yes, it would. And one of the things we've thought is, as a resident of the town of Camden, I think it's important that if you're a resident in the town of Camden and have a boat, that you should really be able to have access to a mooring in the harbor and not have to sit on a waiting list for 2 years while you have to move your boat to Rockland or Belfast or neighboring harbors. And there are ways we can do that. So we're looking at that aspect also. And under that is a review of the rates, late fees for November Select Board meeting. That's getting a little close. but we are working on that.
Those are rates, that's not November.
We do the fee order in January.
Right.
Yep.
Oh, you do?
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's getting a little confused maybe with the day sale agreement dates, I think.
Well, it's nice to have some recommendations from the
Oh,
Harbor
yeah,
Committee
absolutely.
way ahead of when.
Yeah,
I do think it would be helpful if you're going to be ready by November to present it to them.
probably toward the end of November.
Yeah.
Especially if that could include some, looking at what some of the rates are in other places
Yeah.
to compare
That's
to.
exactly what we're doing. Yes.
Yep.
Under harbor use and management, we'd also like to review the wait list procedures and practices and how that's addressed, and maybe we can clean that up a little bit. The difficult issue is commercial uses. Windjammers, review licensing agreements and renewal for April 2020,
That would be the expiration of their third year.
which is the expiration of their current licensing agreement. The next would be day sailors, review license agreement application form for renewal January 2020. So we've been working on that. What we've come up with is a boilerplate commercial passenger vessel licensing agreement. And what that does, we took the Windjammer agreement and the day sailor agreement, combined all the boilerplate information in that, and then we've created addendums
For each.
for each location, for, so we've created addendums for public landing day sailors, an addendum for day sailor second boat ticket sales, an addendum for Windjammer public landing, an addendum for Windjammer Library Park, an addendum for Steamboat Landing. So that way, and the thought is, we just streamline it and simplify so that the licensing agreement just pertains to each location. We've made some serious headway on that.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yes.
Would the times for renewals become more uniform? So the day sailors are not doing a year, while the windjammers are doing 3 years?
Yeah, well, and the day sailors have requested a 3-year agreement. So the concept is to renew the Windjammer agreements, day sailor agreements, all at the same meeting for a 3-year period. And in doing that, they would all come due every 3 years. So, and that's spelled out in the agreements, and one of the stipulations is if an agreement changes hands or is
Yeah.
reassigned,
Yep.
it's reassigned for the balance of that agreement.
I think that's,
I think you'd be careful. Well, I don't want to, let's not get into discussions of details of it. I
Right.
understand your concept, and we'll
Yep.
discuss that when you bring it to the table, because you got to keep in mind that when something is, licenses are not something you can hand to somebody else as
Oh,
part
no,
of your
no,
sale.
they have to go through a new review process.
Through the town.
Yes,
Okay. I didn't
through
hear
the
that.
select board.
Yeah, and I don't want to do those now.
Yeah, right.
I think it's nice for them to bring up a little bit of what they've been thinking
Sure,
about, so,
sure.
because sometimes it takes, for those of us who aren't really into
fine,
it,
that's fine.
you have to introduce the concept, and then you can think about it a little bit, and so I
Sinks in.
kind of like
Give it time to sink
the,
in.
That's fine,
yeah,
that's fine. Well,
So,
I think you understand that. I just want to make sure they understood we weren't just allowing this license to be handed off to somebody if they decide to sell the boat.
Yeah. The reason, just to let you know, the reason I asked that question, I went to some of the subcommittee meetings last year, and the day sailors having to renew every year, as opposed to the windjammers every 3 years, was a hardship on them, because it took a lot of work on their part to renew the license every single year, and they thought it wasn't fair to do it when the windjammers could do it every 3 years. So I was curious to see where you're going with that.
and it's just solid business practice. I mean,
It is.
they need to be able to schedule for the next year.
Right, and that's exactly the problem they were
That
having.
makes sense.
Sense.
Sure.
What was the reasoning behind that originally? Was it like, well, these day sailors are kind of on a trial basis, we don't, or,
Well, I think part of it comes into if day sail type boats have a tendency of changing hands more often than do windjammers type vessels because of the amount of investment. That's probably the thinking behind
I
it.
don't know the background
I think
on
it's
that.
probably-
I'm just, just as.
Probably lost in the
I've
fog
seen
of
that happen.
time how
I've seen
it
that happen
started.
before.
Bottom line is they were
Day sail
long
boats are not that
overdue for
expensive.
revamping.
Yes, good.
So that brings up the next question, is the day sailor license agreements are due January 1st.
Correct. They have to be re-signed by
So-
January 1st.
So the paperwork, they have to file their paperwork in November.
That's been the schedule.
I mean, it would be nice if they could ask for a 1-year or a 3-year or a, I don't know, because sometimes it is nice to be able to say, you know what? Because it hasn't always been 100% smooth sailing with certain things, and to be able to,
We would have remedies.
I didn't even,
Something went wrong in the middle of a 3-year agreement that I assume that you're putting something in it for the town as remedies to cure a problem.
And
I mean, there are a lot of things I can think of. It's
Yeah.
even just the ticket selling and
Yes.
but whether, who can sit
So-
on the benches and for how
Yes,
long, and
yes.
that's like,
Yes.
just to
It's very
touch
touch
on
and go.
that, but that's really not what we're here to discuss. But
So go ahead.
on the agreement, it's an annual review process by the harbor master and the harbor committee with, what am I trying to say?
A recommendation.
Recommendation to the select board.
For continuation of the contract.
Yes.
I think a
In your
big
draft.
thing with a lot of them is business people. If they need to secure financing,
Sure.
that kind of thing, it
Sure.
helps for them to have a longer-term agreement.
it does make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
We have to make it a little bit, we have to deal with a few more issues.
It was very
Ahead of time.
important to them.
Yes.
Well
Ticket
put.
kiosk.
Very good, Mark.
So, and in breaking that down, it's been helpful for us because we've actually been able to break down the real issues and just move forward on the non-issues. And the issues seem to be the rates, the parking, and the ticket sales.
Yep. Yep.
Just that simple.
Yep.
And we haven't come up with,
And you may not.
yes. So what we're trying to do is come up with options
Sure.
for you guys to choose. It's,
That's what we really need is the
Kind of
framing of
working.
the issue, so we can understand where, this is controversial, this is, and that's what's really helpful, is to
Yeah.
have some knowledgeable people kind of break it down for us. And
Yeah, I think
So-
I've always described Mark and other committees that I've been played with, I said, identify the issue, tell us what options you looked at, A, B, and C, and which one do you recommend? And it gives us something to sink our teeth into, rather than always being given a fait accompli. We looked at one option, and that's what you have to face, so it puts us in an awkward position of having to be creative on the fly. So,
it's like an interrogation kind
Yeah.
of thing of like, well, did you think of this, and did you think of this? And then the committee ends up not wanting to share with us the other options because they've already decided what they want, and so it's like, let's not tell them too much about the other thing.
we've thought of a lot.
that was perfect, Mark, thank you.
So that brings up the timing issue.
Okay,
What do we do in the meantime, really work on that?
Exactly. I mean, the committee really needs more time than November to present the options to you.
Well, I suppose.
So if we tie this in with the April 2020 windjammers, that might give us the time we need.
Go ahead, Mark, go ahead.
Could we extend the day sailors agreements to April 2020,
Yes, we could.
from January 1st?
Yes, we could.
Not sailing, so it's,
As a one-time
Well, they.
situation.
Probably like to know
Yes,
Right.
yes.
There would be a
Before
job there when
April.
you come back.
whether they're,
Yeah, that's true, but on the other side, I'm thinking of the windjammers. The windjammers come up in April for a new 3-year contract. If they're already committed to the summer already. So I think giving the day sailors I don't know, we can do it till April also. It's no different than the windjammers.
I know, but that doesn't work well, because every time anything comes up where we might actually change something, they say, well, if you do, you're going to destroy our business, because we've already planned for it.
That's,
So we have to get ahead of it somehow so that we can,
yeah, it's going to be difficult
like, we
given the
might have to do
schedule.
one more, a 9-month.
Might be able to
Sorta.
just kind of renew them for the year like we usually do.
9 months, maybe. so that-
Or whatever we do,
On the
and then
January schedule.
supersede those agreements with whatever new agreement.
Yeah.
is developed
It
and
sounds like, I
approved.
agree, Audra, it sounds like you're saying, well, let's say we re-up their current contract in January 1st, 2020 for 1 year. Then we come to them in April,
less.
and say, here is if you're willing to accept it, of course, a modified 3-year agreement that's going to take you forward for 3 years from April 1st, approximately 2020.
Try to get off the April schedule, but.
Well, whatever date it is, I'm just saying, it'd be nice to get the windjammers and the day sailors in the same cycle.
Definitely.
You know, okay, so, and right now,
Right at
the
once.
wind, yeah, and by the way, we could always give the windjammers an extension until the following November too, with this current contract they have, and renew them all on January 1st, 2021. So we have options.
or with that said, I mean, could we just renew them on January 1, but not approve it until April? Just
They're
Data.
going to want to have their business plans for the summer set in place, in fairness to them. So whatever, if we're going to give them an agreement in January 1st, we should, if we want, with the understanding that may, to their advantage, may be offered a 3-year document on X date. Doesn't have to be April 1st, but whatever the date is. So we get them all, windjammers and day sailors, in sync.
Have you looked at whether, is it a definite thing that the windjammer day sailor distinction and all those definitions makes sense for,
In the
I mean,
harbor.
defining them differently.
yes, because not everything, I mean, the lively lady isn't, I mean, I guess it's a day sailor according to our.
It is.
That takes a while for a non-boating person
It
to,
does.
I've read over those definitions so many times, and.
Well,
Why-
and that's
Remind
exactly,
me why that matters.
that's exactly why we've done it this way, because we've got all the legalese in the boilerplate commercial vessel agreement.
Oh, so you are
Okay.
proposing to get rid of that?
And then we've got the
Addendum.
addendum that goes with that agreement,
Is that based on location or based on type of vessel? The
location,
addendum?
where
So
they're
you would-
operating
You
from.
would be getting rid of the
Distinction
windjammer
on vessel
day
type.
sailor distinction. You'd be.
Yes.
You'd be moving to a location-based
Yes,
agreement.
Yes.
I see a no and a yes.
Oh, that's good.
The cover agreement is the boilerplate, that applies to all commercial passenger vessels, all the terms and conditions, insurance, indemnity.
Right, I think I understood
Et
that,
cetera.
but then,
Then the addenda
I think
for
what-
a day sailor is specific to the day sailor activity.
I thought it was going to be specific to a location that they were
well,
operating from.
it's specific to the activity.
Yeah, not location, because we have one windjammer
Of-
on the landing,
Oh,
right? One of the windjammers is located on the end of the so-called landing.
Well, no, that would fall under, Windjammer Public Landing addendum.
Okay, all right, okay,
Okay, and then we had a Windjammer Library Park addendum.
got it. Oh, perfect, perfect.
They have
Day
two.
sailor was all at the landing wharf, okay.
But
Okay.
what makes a windjammer again? It's based on what they do, not what they are.
It's
Principally,
it's based
principally
on
windjamming.
Us, not according to marine.
Not how the boat is
terminology.
built, but what you use it for.
what you use it for. The
Yeah.
day sailors are specifically,
Principally.
So
Principally-
Allison, are you saying you would
Principally.
prefer it if it's location-based as opposed, like we would look?
I'm saying I would prefer that we not define words in a way that the rest of the world doesn't.
Agree.
Because, you go, I go with my kids to the Penobscot. I'm not a boating person, but I live in a family of boating people. So we go and I'm trying to learn all the time. And I'm always like, what does this word mean? And so you go to the Penobscot Marine Museum and you've got flashcards, okay? And they teach you what a windjammer is. That has nothing to do with what a windjammer is in Camden, or a day sailor, or a schooner, it's not, they don't coincide with the real-world definitions.
Correct,
And it takes a
but-
long time to
but
understand that.
they do coincide with the harbor ordinance.
Which
Yeah,
defines
well,
things.
I'm saying, that,
defines.
we may
That's what I
need
was
to-
asking. Is that
we
what
may
you're
need
interested
to-
in
Yeah, that is what
changing?
I'm saying,
Yeah.
that because so much of those agreements, it is tied in with the harbor ordinance, and we've just, over the years, doubled down on this language that is not easy to understand. It's counterintuitive for even boat people that aren't familiar with the
Yes,
harbor ordinance in
yes.
Camden. So,
And I think, Alison, that feeds to one of the work plan items, which is second to last, about reviewing the harbor ordinance and the elements in it. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but just for that reason.
yeah, but so I just don't want to sign agreements for 3 years that use terminology that we're
Yeah, I
hoping
would
to
agree.
get rid of in a year and a
I
half.
would agree. They both have to go in.
Maybe or maybe not.
See how complicated
I
this
do.
has been?
That's why we had to start over, and we're glad to have you.
But I think,
Thank you for.
yeah, but Mark, what I'm hearing, and I agree, we should be working on this whenever we get to this 3-year joint agreement timing. Let's work on that. But it has to be in concert with looking at the harbor ordinance to make sure we're not confusing the planet, because I think we are.
Just to,
With some definitions.
Fair. I mean, I would add, remember, any changes, like if we decide that we're going to call something different than what it is, or define something different than what it is from our current ordinance, that needs an ordinance amendment and a
saying.
town vote. So if we're talking to try to do, line these up
Got to
for
go on the
April,
list when we're prioritizing.
it's either got to go on the list or, but trying to line these up so that everyone's on the same April 2020,
Yep.
we're going to have to be specific enough in that license agreement so that the changes that we hope get approved by voters
In June.
still match with that license agreement.
Yeah, that's
We
why.
make our harbor ordinance just more vague.
Yes, you can.
Probably,
That's probably
You absolutely can. That's
because
exactly.
the types of boats are going to change and the way we
Exactly.
talk
They-
about things. and-
It looks like it was a stew made by 15 chefs.
simplify it as much as
You know,
possible.
yeah, it should be simplified.
It's
But
like,
I-
if you're not from here, you don't understand what that means. It's
But
just-
no, I agree with Allison too, but I think what we should think about when we're doing this is exactly what Jeremy said. If these go in concert, it may dictate the schedule for when we, let's say, start the Windjammers January 1st, 2020 for a year, give it to them again, fine, current agreement, and then we work on this document, work on the harbor runs in parallel, and then maybe we execute both Windjammer and Day Sailor later sometime next year. Or revise this wonderful idea of this combined agreement. I think that could work. Taylor?
We should, just in terms of making sure that they can move forward or have an idea of what the short term looks like, let's come up with some kind of decision on what we want to do in the interim with the day sailors.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm in favor of, it seems like the simplest thing to do would be to, I think what you suggested, renew them under the current agreement right now for another year.
Yep.
While the Harbor Committee finishes working on that, and then if we can come back to it in April with a revised agreement, replace them.
Or you could extend their current agreement potentially for X number of months,
Yeah, we could do that too.
Either
one.
way.
better than doing a new year license agreement.
The problem with that, though, is that I guess the sense of security that they would have, knowing that when they come back, they have the summer secured.
I mean, I would really recommend that you just approve
A full
another
year.
year. You just renew the yearly agreement and with the understanding, and we have something written in it that when
Gets
the
changed.
new agreement comes forward, that's going to supersede the current agreement.
There you go.
Is that? what
Yeah,
you-
and
take the-
something
it'll
about
take the
definitions
heat
of
off you.
boats and the harbor, like
As
definitions
defined
may
on a certain
change
date.
or.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
if,
this is-
I just get the sense in terms of having this discussion on the three issues that you outlined with the day sailors that seem to be sticking points, perhaps it might make some anxiety, take some anxiety off of that if they know
Yeah.
that for the next year, we're good, so now we can talk about this without a clock hanging over everybody's head. I don't know if that makes it easier or not, but, you know, perhaps it takes some.
Well, I mean, it certainly makes it easier for us, and it takes the heat off, yes.
Yeah, and that's what we have to do.
You know, it's.
But Mark, if the objective is to get to this multiple three-year agreement for all the entities, which is a good objective, I think, then we have to do something like this to make, so they have something signed for next year.
Well, I mean, what this would do is it would take us off that three-year program, because now the day sailors are starting a year after the windjammers.
No,
We can change-
no. What Audra said, what I heard her say was, and I agree, January 1st, 2020, they get another one-year agreement, but in that agreement, it states that we're, just so you know, in signing this, we're in the process of preparing a three-year agreement, which will be presented to you by some
April
date.
2020. It'll
Yep.
supersede that agreement.
Yep.
We don't even write a date in. We just say we're preparing a new one and it's going to supersede this one when it's.
Correct.
And I think the idea is, one, they get their agreement so they know what they're doing.
yeah.
And I don't think there's a single person there that will argue the fact that they know a three-year agreement's coming, because it's something they've needed and
And they need
wanted
and
for a long
wanted.
time.
Right.
So I think that'll, it's just the transition period we have to worry about.
It'll also give you all time to look at what I think they need to go in parallel to Allison's points. I agree. We gotta look at the language of the harbor ordinance. It's cumbersome as hell. Excuse my language, but it is. It's just too, it looks like it's been cooked over too many stoves.
I haven't attended all of these meetings, but I will say, I mean, these day sailors, they're at these meetings. I
Yep.
mean, they're involved, so
Yep.
I don't think you should expect them to come to a meeting, you know, in outrage that
Yeah.
these license agreements are changing. I mean, they're part of the process and they know it's
Oh,
happening.
well,
And it's something they even want.
I think we should all be
Positive.
prepared for phone call it.
Being positive.
Yeah.
Is
but-
that,
I've just read the Harbor Committee, or the Harbor Ordinance too many times, because I seem to understand it.
well,
That's a problem. We might have to replace you.
again, discussion for another day, but I think that kind of approach,
Maybe I should try again.
as far as the work plan goes, we just took the heat off of your November, January 1st deadline for the day sailors by saying we can give them a one-year agreement that stipulates, as we suggested, that another agreement's coming with 3 years, whenever that date happens.
And hold on.
Okay.
So that's what we would be doing for the windjammers too. They wouldn't get a 3-year.
Well, Windjammers contracts are on a different schedule. They all expire on
Oh, you think it's
April
gonna be fine
1st,
because of the April.
2020. They already do. They don't have a contract. Now, when we get to April, we'll have to make a decision with the Windjammers. It may be the same thing, but they don't have a January 1st contract.
I know, but still
Gives
April,
us
if we ever
till
wanted to
April
do the,
to work on
till
this
April.
We'll
agreement.
be fine by
wanted
then.
to change the harbor ordinance,
fine-tuned
and
by
then
then.
3 years.
That's
I mean,
another
this is
issue.
why nothing ever happens.
That's right,
This
it's
is why I say
complicated.
the same, because it's,
Yeah.
because you just get, you paint, it's clear that it's very easy to paint yourself into a corner, and
Well, that's been the root cause of a lot of stuff that I think has happened over the years. We try to be careful, in fairness to the day sailors, windjammers in the town. And we put a lot of things into the harbor ordinance to try to clarify that, and I think it just
It's too much in the harbor
muddied the
ordinance.
waters. It just completely muddied the waters. But it's a parallel discussion, and we don't need to solve it now, but I think they both need a hard look to keep it simple. Why do we need to have a million definitions in the harbor ordinance? What's the necessity of that? If you want to control, I mean, the harbor ordinance is a town document that sets policy and procedure. It doesn't specify, what the contract says, what the contract, all stipulations should be in an operating contract with an entity, a boat or.
Not an ordinance.
Not an ordinance.
does it say that a windjammer has to be a sail-powered vessel in our ordinance, or is it all about the amount of time you go out for?
Or about
Well,
the
it-
amount of time.
Crazy.
Yeah, I have to agree. Well, anyhow, these are some of the
All right.
complications, and I
As long as
think
you don't
it's,
do lunch, you're a windjammer.
thank you, Mark, keep
So
going.
maybe what I should do is email you all the agreements that I've worked on?
No, that's, you're doing fine. We're talking
I'm
about,
not-
we're
I
talking
can't.
about, Mark,
Yeah.
we're trying to focus on the work plan and give you some
Right.
time to get that email, that document, because you will come to the select board again someday with all kinds of fun options for the agreements in some future date. It doesn't have to, and we're trying to take that trigger to your head off
Got it.
for a few months.
So actually, and that should be a priority, right? That the fees, we do want to try to hear about before the end of November so that we can make a decision on that in January.
That's true.
We'll
Yes.
focus
good point.
on that at our
Yes.
next meeting, our
Perfect,
fees.
perfect.
Next on the work plan, under commercial uses, cruise ships. Review policies and impacts of cruise ships on the town.
And what's in a definite, what defines a cruise ship?
It's
Big boat.
150, I think. It's 150. Up to
50, 175
Yeah,
people?
it's,
Up to 150.
it's
Is it
in the
175?
fees. Is it 175?
Built with a lot of people instead
Big
of
boat with a
very
lot of
little
people, right?
It's big boats with not very many people.
Well.
We're not looking at that.
The cruise ships, what we're talking about are the cruise ships that anchor out by Curtis Island.
Yep.
And bring in their tenders with
They're,
And they operate commercially.
hundreds of people.
they're
that-
cruise ships that are not privately owned.
Yes.
You can't use the definition for, you can't use the word cruise ship in the definition for cruise ship, but
Right?
if you're trying to come up with a definition for cruise ship, you can't use the word cruise ship in the definition.
Feels like a
but-
rabbit hole.
Yeah.
It's a bigger boat. But
Right,
anyway,
so the next thing on the list here is the fisherman's wharf, review policies and impacts on that.
Hold on, the
protection-
fisherman's
fishermen,
Commercial
lift or
fishermen.
the float or the fishermen themselves, their impacts, or just,
Yeah, the use of the fishermen's
Parking.
impacts, the parking and the dockage and.
yep.
also look at just, not etiquette isn't the right word, but
Dress attire?
no, more like, waste and waste management. And if I had, the amount of zip ties that I see on the floats all the time, just,
That's garbage.
yeah, I mean, well, they're cutting the zip ties off every single day, and some of them go in the water and some of them are on the floats, and just things like that, like, I see traps with lots of, well, it's because we don't have trash cans, so people in their desperation use the lobster traps as trash cans. But that's not their fault, that's our fault. But,
Yeah.
okay. We used to what?
Mark, let's go.
Oh, that's a good
Okay.
idea.
Next was the protection of harbor waters, and that was in the comprehensive plan. Harbor cleanliness, study of water quality, implement boat or waste discharge education program, look at CFR regulations for waste management, which takes us right back to day sailors and windjammers. And what we did is we put, and cruise ships. And
Oh, yeah.
we
People.
put regulations in that
Oh, yeah.
licensing agreement on their waste management systems.
Which the select board's already approved.
Well,
The mailer is already approved on the, well, I'm sorry, it's in the moorings and the floats.
Yes, that's for the
That's right, not in
moorings.
the ships.
What?
We approved the flyer that's going to go into the envelopes. When I receive my mooring bill, it's
Oh,
it's
yeah.
a signing commitment for,
It's a survey.
and
Questions that you have to
a
answer.
pledge.
Yeah, and a pledge.
What you're suggesting, this will be, if this moves forward under this agreement, as part of the agreement, if they're abiding by it, they have to abide by the waste management piece of the
yes,
agreement.
yes.
Yes,
It would be binding.
It would be binding, it would be
Yes.
loss of license
Yes.
if they don't.
it's Clean Water Act. Yeah.
And that sums it up. The review harbor ordinance and review, excuse me, review MSR Title 38, Chapter 1. These are both just for committee knowledge, understanding the ordinance, understanding the regulations for harbor management.
Right. Just to clarify on your harbor cleanliness thing, we just received the last draft of which you haven't seen yet, I don't believe, of the Harbour study we did with our intern this
The
past summer.
executive summary?
No, unfortunately, it doesn't have yet an executive summary in it, but it will.
So I did receive the one,
Prior one.
the final one, and then you asked for an executive summary?
Correct, that hasn't been quite, that's just tweaking, that's not a big deal. But part of what has to be looked at here is to me, we're relying on the Harbor Committee to continue some of the activity that the intern and others did during the summer to continue this investigation of our pollution problems in the harbor. We don't want to let that go back on the shelf as a study that's done and we walk away from it.
Correct.
All right, so just want to clarify the wording here when it says sources of pollution. There's work to be done there, including testing. I believe you have the testing procedure that was used. We need a plan for that.
We have, actually, we have 2 members of our committee that are following that up.
You want to the good answers. Anyhow, question, Allison.
Can I make a comment about an additional or
Sure.
background work plan item? Is that-
Yes.
That's what it's for.
Okay. So, so one of the things, as I've been doing a lot of research about all this stuff, and this whole, just like the idea of looking at when we go to replace things and making sure that our infrastructure is maybe a little bit more fish friendly with, a lot of places are doing things like light penetrating floats so that, when you start to cover an entire harbor in floats and boats and all these things, it blocks out a lot of sun and it changes the ecosystem. Some fish are scared from going underneath things, or there's a ton of research that has gone into how to make floats and piers and wharfs not so. Seawalls are another thing. The city of Seattle has just done this major, or they're working on a major revamp of their waterfront. And so instead of just having their seawall be these massive walls, they're trying to make it more broken up with rocks and light penetrating options. And I think, in the end, the lure of our harbor will be also the natural resources and just people seeing more fish and more things. And I would love it if we could look into, when we go to replace some of our floats, that we try to, see if there are light penetrating options. There are cool things even with like translucent boards where people can see down and it lets the light in. Or so if, I guess just, asking you to sort of have that kind of thing on your radar. And then also, yeah.
Along those lines, I've noticed a lot more habitat moorings. Rather than granite blocks, they're using habitat moorings.
Oh, good.
And that's what I use.
Instead of the ballast, yeah, me too.
And maybe we could encourage that or find a way to
Sure.
regulate it, or,
It's kind of an educational thing, frankly. A lot of people don't know about them.
but, and then also just looking at like kayakers and paddleboards and the ease of use for people that don't have a power vessel, or that don't, that just want to go down there and either store a kayak or, it's really a problem for, you can get a dinghy dock permit, but eventually that space really starts to get
Fills up.
congested.
Well,
And
that seems to be a problem at the dinghy dock. If you have kayaks and canoes, with waterfalls, they spin and they take up the whole side of the dinghy dock.
right. And I think in the past, we've looked at, kayak racks there, like Rockport. You can put a paddleboard or a kayak.
We're
on a-
looking at that, we're looking at Lake Beach, we're looking at Steamboat Landing.
And maybe even Harbor Park and the public landing. It's not really fair to ask kayakers to be, we've got this like thriving, exciting hub that's right in downtown. And then we're saying, well, we can't really fit any kayakers and paddleboarders in. You have to go over there. I don't want to go sometimes over to Lake Beach to, even just dragging things down there is hard. I think it would be nice to look at whether even Harbour Park, or, it's been an easy thing in the past to be able to say, oh, well, I think that would be commercial, or that's historic, so we're not allowed to. A lot of those things aren't actually true. When you dig into it, we could have the kayak racks over in Harbour Park. We could make it easier to access there. We could probably fit kayak racks in a parking spot or two, so I would just like to add a plea to
Okay.
advocate for.
All right. That's
That kind of
reasonable.
thing, too.
That's reasonable. Mark, you had a comment?
Yes, I would just like to say thank you. You took on a very big job being chairman of the brand new Harbor Committee, a lot of new people, a lot of work, so
That
thank
was the
you.
next point I was going to bring up.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Thank you to all the people that signed up to be a part of this, and thanks for all the hard work, because it's a tremendous, asset to the town, and there's a lot of work involved, so I appreciate your
Absolutely. And remember,
taking
Mark,
charge.
remember, Mark, don't get mad, just get even.
What we're running into is when a new member joins a committee, they always have the seasoned members to guide them, and they can sit back and just study for a couple months. But with our committee, we're all new, and it's,
No, two of your ex officios
well,
are
yes,
seasoned.
I'm sorry.
Got to
I-
utilize that talent. That's why it's there. And I understand they're not always there because of schedule too, but yeah. but
Unfortunately, I think
Steve.
Sandy's email address was wrong,
Oh,
so
no.
he's missed most of the meetings.
Oh,
Oh, well, if we need to
So,
replace him.
We've got
oh.
that straightened out.
But it's interesting, looking at this and knowing how far you've had to come, it's
Right.
very impressive.
Yeah, it's a good
A
job.
lot of work done in a very short time, and it's very impressive.
yeah.
And I think you especially, having just the knowledge that you have of the town and
And being
your
voted,
even,
too.
the planning board and just your sort of even-keeled way of looking at things too is very helpful,
It's
so
the whole
thank you.
committee. It's the whole
Oh,
committee. There's a
absolutely.
lot of knowledge there.
There is absolutely true. Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Appreciate it,
Thank you.
guys.
Thank you, Kathy, and
Yes, thank
also
you.
Elliot too, and all the rest of the
And
gang that's not
Josh
here.
and-
Oh, Josh is here too. Don't want to forget you, Josh. All right. Okay, with that said, the last item on the agenda is to return to the public hearing for the renewal of liquor licenses for Peter Otts and Captain Swift Inn. I'm too tired to say it. The purpose of the public hearing is for the select board to get some input from the public on the matters at hand. I'll ask if anybody in the public wants to speak for, against, or to the ordinance, to the element in general is be fine. Please be courteous and brief. Direct all questions through me. At the end of the public input, then I will close the public discussion. There'll be no more public input unless a select board member has a question. And with that, we will proceed with looking at the public hearing for the renewal of Peter Ott's liquor license on the water at 16 Bayview Street. Is there anything in the public who would like to speak to the liquor license for Peter Ott's, for, against, or not? Being nobody's here, that the answer is no. I'll close the public hearing and revert to select board for deliberation.
I move that we approve the renewal liquor license for Peter Otts on the Water at 16 Baby Street.
Second.
All those in favor? 4-0.
I was a bartender at Peter Ott's
I
for
did not know that.
for
Actually, I did
several
know that.
years.
I did know
That's what
that.
helped keep me in Camden.
That
And
was the old Peter Ott's store, the old location,
well, it's all
right?
the same. It's the same owner. They just
Right.
moved
Just different
locations. The
location,
same
right.
Peter Ott's, just new location.
Right, just no salad bar.
That, you know what, honestly,
No.
that's around the time I stopped working there.
Okay.
But I still support the business.
For the second public hearing, is anybody here from the public who would like to speak to the application of Captain Swift Inn at 73 Elm Street? Not seeing anybody here at all. I will close the public hearing and revert to select board deliberations.
Move that we approve a renewal liquor license for Captain Swift Inn at 73 Elm Street.
Second.
All those in favor? 4-0. Thank you. And with that, I'll look to a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion, we adjourn to select board.
Second.
All those in favor? 4-0. Thank you all.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks, Kendall.